FBI Director William Sessions today confirmed an ABC News report. He told CBS News law correspondent Rita Braber that the Justice Department is investigating him for possible ethics violations. The allegations, and that's all they are at the moment, the allegations reportedly involve Sessions' alleged use of government planes for private travel and alleged favors for his wife and his assistant in possible violation of government rules. Sessions says he is, and I now quote the FBI Director, confident of the outcome. On another front, the Justice Department is refusing to investigate some of its own. United States Attorney General William Barr says he will not name a special prosecutor to look into charges that top justice officials stole a computer company's software and then conspired to drive that computer company into bankruptcy. Barr says there is not enough evidence to warrant a special prosecutor. Now, from around the world, more CBS News. In Cairo, more than 400 bodies have now been recovered from the worst earthquake in Egypt's history. Scores of old and decrepit buildings were flattened yesterday, and more bodies are believed to be buried in the rubble. A University of Chicago professor has won the Nobel Prize in Economics. Gary Becker was honored for showing how economic theories can explain such social behavior as crime, divorce, and discrimination. America's college students are learning a tough lesson in economics. The College Board says tuition prices continue to rise far more quickly than the overall inflation rate. 9 private colleges now cost more than $24,000 a year. And in Oak City, North Carolina, a 15-hour siege ended in a gun battle early today between police and a hostage-holding bank robber. One hostage was caught in the North Carolina crossfire and killed. We regret to report 2 deaths in our CBS News family. Former CBS News correspondent Hughes Rudd died today in France. He was 71. Hughes Rudd was a gifted writer, good company, a great storyteller. He wrote stories for newspapers and national magazines and reported for CBS News from around the world, as well as from the anchor chair on the CBS Morning News. And another longtime friend and colleague, makeup artist Frances Arvo, died at her home in Fargo, North Dakota. She also was 71. Everyone called her Franny. She retired 2 years ago after many years of working her magic, making those of us on television look better than we really looked. Perhaps her most famous job was one she didn't do. Richard Nixon declined Franny's makeup services before his debate with John F. Kennedy in 1960, and some say it cost Mr. Nixon the election. Coming up next, Eye on America. Tonight, the seldom heard voices of poverty.
When the person who doctors the family gets a cough and cold, everyone suffers.
Mom, someone took my sleeve.
I earned it myself. Time to doctor that cough with Robitussin, because more doctors and pharmacists recommend Robitussin than any other cough medicine.
Look, Mom's feeling better. Uh-oh.
Robitussin, recommended by Dr. Mom. Which Robitussin is right for you? Ask your doctor or pharmacist. And now there's Robitussin cough drops. Cough drops from the cough experts.
Draw from the facts. There's a way to maintain regularity without drugs. It starts here, a high-fiber diet, which can include Kellogg's All Bran, an excellent source of wheat bran fiber, may help you stay regular, drug-free. And there's a lot to be said for that, naturally. A high-fiber diet on Kellogg's All Bran for drug-free regularity.
Hey, is Tegrin shampoo on sale?
Nope, that's their new lower price.
But it's still just as tough on dandruff, right?
Sure, Tegrin doesn't do less, just costs less.
Sounds right to me.
Tegrin, the right dandruff shampoo at the right price.
Introducing Ford Taurus Wagon and the bags. While all wagons have room for bags in back, only Ford has wagons in this class with 2 bags up front, keeping Taurus out front in safety. Ford Taurus Wagon.
For better, for worse, Marriage American Style. 48 hours at a special time, Wednesday.
Unfortunately, tens of millions of people in this country are living below the American standard poverty line, or not much above it. Among them is a group you don't hear much about. They are women, elderly and single, struggling to get by. Giselle Fernandez has their story in tonight's Eye on America.
In the faces of these elderly women, you can't help but sense a warmth and character spun from a lifetime of work. There's a sense of pride made in the investment in careers and at home with family.
2 cubes, that's 50 cents.
But if you look a little closer, you'll also see the pain of a lifetime unrewarded.
I spent $3, this is $6 more. I may probably spend the $9.
Jacqueline French, like many of America's senior women living alone, finds herself counting every penny in a life of poverty.
I don't know. If I start complaining, I'll start feeling sorry for myself, and I won't be able to accomplish anything at all.
After 20 years of work in the Boston City schools, after raising 7 children alone after a divorce, Jacqueline's total income, pension, and Social Security is just $550 a month.
Things didn't turn out the way that I thought they would.
Jacqueline is not unique. Half the elderly women living alone have incomes less than $9,500 a year.
Can I get you anything else?
At a farmer's market in Boston, the market's director sees firsthand just how hard it is to make ends meet.
If it's a question of whether they're going to pay 50 cents a pound for tomatoes or 48, they'll wait until they're 48. And now when they reach this stage in life where it should be comfortable and happy, it's not. Everything is downhill.
Hello, Bunny.
Marion Heiligman never imagined at 73 she would have to work. She gets about $100 a week in Social Security, 50 from a part-time job as a social worker. She's struggling to hold on to the one thing that means the most to her.
I just love it. I love being here. I just love it. I'm a home person.
Marion has lived in this house for 40 years, raised her family here.
I just live a simple life. I just live each day at a time, and as I say, I keep within my income. I get nothing that I can't afford to get. I put a certain amount of gas in my car every week. I spend a certain amount for my food. That's it.
And the future doesn't look a whole lot brighter. Despite the media myth, the majority of working women today are not upwardly mobile. In fact, they're still stuck in low-paying jobs, still earning less than men, and still getting fewer benefits. So what does this mean for women these days who are living longer? A retirement in or near poverty.
Ironically, more and more women have entered the labor market, and they're doing dual labor jobs. They're working harder at home, they're working harder in the workplace, but the payoff at the end doesn't seem to be translating into better futures for themselves or their families.
I've spent my money sending the children to school, so that's where a lot of my money went.
The challenges are even greater for elderly black women, who make up the most impoverished group. After decades of work as a nurse, Quincy Frazier, now 75, lives on retirement benefits that total less than $700 a month. Today, she cares for her visiting grandson, but regrets she can't afford a larger apartment to entertain her whole family. How much would you need to have come in every month to make you live the way you want to live?
If I was getting $1,000, a little over, I think I could live a little better.
I can live very happily on $20,000 a year. That would make me quite reasonably feel rich, I guess.
$15,000, that would be wonderful. I could do a lot with that.
In the Bronx, I'm Giselle Fernandez for Eye on America.
2 a.m., 36 Pine Street. Apartment 4C has a backache and can't sleep. 3C overdid her afternoon workout and is paying the price. 2C had an aching back, but fortunately, she also has Tylenol PM, with extra-strength Tylenol pain reliever, plus a gentle ingredient to help her sleep. And a good night's sleep was all she needed to make her day a whole lot brighter. Tylenol PM, so you can rest easy.
Delicious. I'm surprised.
I love this cereal. These people are eating a high-fiber cereal, and they love the taste. Surprised? I'm not, because they're eating fruit and fiber. And as a nutritionist, I know fruit and fiber has high-fiber bran flakes, and it's the only one with plump raisins, chewy dates, walnuts, and crunchy oat clusters for a delicious taste.
Surprisingly delicious.
Post Fruit and Fiber cereal. Try it for the fiber. Love it for the taste.
1 gram of fat, or 1 gram of fat. That's all the fat in this luscious chicken Mirabella. Just one of Weight Watchers' new Smart Ones. The only line of entrees with 1 gram of fat.
Total indulgence, zero guilt.
After examining, testing, it's a fact. You can buy new Preparation H hydrocortisone cream with the maximum strength available without a prescription to relieve problem itch. New Preparation H hydrocortisone cream. Prescription strength without a prescription.
Who are you going to call the most this month?
My grandparents in Philippines.
My uncle, Subramaniam, who lives in Agra, India.
With Sprint's new program, The Most, you automatically save 20% off whoever you call the most each month.
I call Wim in the Netherlands.
And with The Most, you can also choose a plan that lets you save 20% on international calls.
Mom in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
My sister in Munich.
My sister in Sri Lanka.
Doesn't anyone have relatives in Buffalo anymore?
The vice presidential candidates' joint appearance begins in about 5 minutes. The families are coming in now. This is a live shot from Atlanta. We'll bring it to you all live, direct from Atlanta in just a few minutes. But first, let's bring in political analyst, CBS News consultant, and our friend Joe Klein for some perspective on what, if anything, is at stake tonight. Joe, Ross Perot, in many ways, stole the show the other night. Can his vice presidential running mate do the same tonight against Senator Gore and Vice President Quayle?
Well, Ross Perot is a natural salesman, which is the next thing to a politician. James Stockdale is an authentic American hero, but he's an academic, and he admits himself that he doesn't know all that much about politics or public policy. It's like walking into a snake pit. He's like going into a football game wearing a baseball uniform tonight. He could do anything. As for the other two guys, the expectations are so low for Dan Quayle that all he has to do is walk in and speak English, and a fair number of people are going to be surprised. And Al Gore has a kind of wooden reputation, but I remember in 1988 he had a great debate coach, his mom, who would put this little sign in front of him with 3 words on it: smile, relax, attack. And I think with Quayle probably bashing him tonight, the sign should read counterattack.
Well, in terms of President Bush, what does he have to do in the next presidential joint appearance to get off the ropes? Smile, relax, and attack? What else can he do?
It is a tough one. Almost anything he tries doesn't work. If he's mean, people don't like him for being mean. We've seen that over the last month or so. If he says, look what I've accomplished as president, they say, look at our economy. If he says, I have this plan for the economy, they say, why haven't you done it before? He's in a very difficult position. Classic politics says you take the first route and you attack, because maybe if you hurt Clinton some more, they'll like him even less than they like you.
Now, about the race as a whole, Governor Clinton is looking at some very encouraging poll numbers. Is this race over? Is it a case of, as Texas Governor Richards has said about George Bush, and I quote her now, stick a fork in him, he's done?
Oh, boy, it's dangerous to say that sort of thing, especially with a guy who, like Bill Clinton, who isn't that well known yet in this country. You know, he kind of reminds me of a turtle, the way he's been performing lately. A very hard, smooth shell, but you don't see all that much of him. Of course, you know, the first political pundit, Aesop, had the turtle win the race.
Joe Klein, thanks. Stick around with us and we'll watch this vice presidential happening together. That's part of our world tonight. We hope you'll stay with us now for CBS News coverage of the vice presidential candidates' joint appearance in Atlanta, coming up right at the top of this hour on this CBS television station. Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News. I'll see you again in just a couple of minutes.
CBS News. When the money crunch looked at credit cards, we warned you that some banks can charge you twice as much interest as others and get away with it. So we helped you figure out if you're getting the best deal. We didn't just look at how you spend your money. We showed you how to save it. The Money Crunch, only on the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
This is CBS.
You're looking at the results of years of Republican neglect.
the highest unemployment in 8 years. The Republicans actually stalled the extension of unemployment benefits, blocked a middle-class tax cut that would help the economy, cut Medicare for senior citizens, and tried to reduce college loans. The Republican leadership, a record of failure, the highest unemployment in 8 years, the worst economic record since the Great Depression. Aren't you ready to say enough is enough? Vote Democratic for a change.
Who's going to give you a light-hearted chicken sandwich that weighs in at around 300 calories? Dairy Queen. Give you chicken the right way. Chicken the light way. Now just $2.19. A perfectly grilled, skinless, boneless filet of chicken. Highlighted with delightful reduced-calorie mayonnaise, tomato, and lettuce. Chicken the light way. Get it now for just $2.19. We treat you right. Dairy Queen.
Watch the Vikings battle Detroit Thursday night at 6:30 on Channel 4.
Campaign 92, the vice presidential debate. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Hello. Vice President Dan Quayle, United States Senator Al Gore of Tennessee, and retired Admiral James Stockdale of California will be appearing shortly. This is the only such joint appearance by the three vice presidential candidates before Election Day. The event is taking place at Georgia Tech University in Atlanta with a single moderator, and theoretically, the candidates will have more of an opportunity to mix it up and respond to each other. They will, of course, be talking up the tops of their tickets and also making the case for themselves why they believe they are best qualified to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. The Bush-Quayle campaign says the vice president's job is to keep up the attacks on Bill Clinton while trying to deflect continuing voter doubts about his own performance as vice president. Gore's reported assignment is to talk up Clinton and the need for change. And then there's the unknown factor, Ross Perot's running mate, retired Admiral, Vietnam War hero, and former POW James Stockdale. The event is about to begin. Here now is the agreed to and approved by the candidates moderator.
Good evening from Atlanta, and welcome to the Vice Presidential Debate sponsored by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates. It's being held here in the Theater for the Arts on the campus of Georgia Tech. I'm Hal Bruno from ABC News, and I'm going to be moderating tonight's debate. The participants are Republican Vice President Dan Quayle, Democratic Senator Al Gore, and retired Vice Admiral James Stockdale, who is the vice presidential nominee for independent candidate Ross Perot. Now, the ground rules for tonight's debate. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. I will then present the issues to be discussed. For each topic, the candidates will have 1 minute and 15 seconds to respond. Then this will be followed by a 5-minute discussion period in which they can ask questions of each other if they so choose. Now, the order of response has been determined by a drawing and will rotate with each topic. At the end of the debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Our radio and TV audience should know that the candidates were given an equal allocation of auditorium seats for their supporters. So I'd like to ask the audience here in the theater to please refrain from applause or any partisan demonstration once the debate is underway, because it takes time away from the candidates. So with that plea from your moderator, let's get started. And we'll turn first to Senator Gore for his opening statement.
Good evening. It's great to be here in Atlanta for this debate, where America will be showcased to the world when the 1996 Olympics are put on right here. It's appropriate because, in a real sense, our discussion this evening will be about what kind of nation we want to be 4 years from now. It's also a pleasure to be with my two opponents this evening. Admiral Stockdale, may I say it's a special honor to share this stage with you. Those of us who served in Vietnam looked at you as a national hero even before you were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. And Mr. Vice President, Dan, if I may, It was 16 years ago that you and I went to the Congress on the very first day together. I'll make you a deal this evening. If you don't try to compare George Bush to Harry Truman, I won't compare you to Jack Kennedy.
You remember the last time someone compared themselves to Jack Kennedy? You remember what they said?
Harry Truman, it's worth remembering, assumed the presidency when Franklin Roosevelt died here in Georgia. Only one of many occasions when fate thrust a vice president into the Oval Office in a time of crisis. It's something to think about during the debate this evening. But our real discussion is going to be about change. Bill Clinton and I stand for change because we don't believe our nation can stand 4 more years of what we've had under George Bush and Dan Quayle. When the recession came, they were like a deer caught in the headlights, paralyzed into inaction, blinded to the suffering and pain of bankruptcies and people who are unemployed. We have an environmental crisis, a health insurance crisis, substandard education. It is time for a change. Bill Clinton and I want to get our country moving forward again, put our people back to work, and create a bright future for the United States of America.
Thank you. Okay, the next statement will be from Vice President Quayle.
Well, thank you, Senator Gore, for reminding me about my performance in the 1988 vice presidential debate. This is 1992. Bill Clinton is running against President George Bush. There are 2 things that I'm going to stress during this debate. One, Bill Clinton's economic plan and his agenda will make matters much, much worse. He will raise your taxes, he will increase spending, he will make government bigger, jobs will be lost. Second, Bill Clinton does not have the strength nor the character to be President of the United States. Let us look at the agendas. President Bush wants to hold the line on taxes, Bill Clinton wants to raise taxes. President Bush is for a balanced budget amendment, Bill Clinton is opposed to it. We want to reform the legal system because it's too costly, Bill Clinton wants the status quo. We want to reform the health care system, Bill Clinton wants to ration health care. Bill Clinton wants to empower government, we want to empower people. In St. Louis, Missouri, in June of this year, Bill Clinton said this: America is the mockery of the world. He is wrong. At some time during these next 4 years, there is going to be a crisis. There will be an international crisis. I can't tell you where it's going to be. I can't even tell you the circumstances, but it will happen. We need a president who has the experience, who has been tested, who has the integrity and qualifications to handle the crisis. The president has been tested. The president has the integrity and the character. The choice is yours. You need to have a president you can trust. Can you really trust Bill Clinton?
Admiral Stockdale, your opening statement, please, sir.
Who am I? Why am I here? I'm not a politician. Everybody knows that. So don't expect me to use the language of the Washington Insider. 37 years in the Navy, and only one of them up there in Washington. And now I'm an academic. The centerpiece of my life was the Vietnam War. I was there the day it started. I led the first bombing raid against North Vietnam. I was there the day it ended, and I was there for everything in between. 10 years in Vietnam, aerial combat, and torture. I know things about the Vietnam War better than anybody in the world. I know some things about the Vietnam War better than anybody in the world. And I know how governments, how American governments can be courageous and how they can be callow. And that's important. That's one thing I'm an insider on. I was the leader of the underground of the American pilots who were shot down in prison in North Vietnam. You should know that the American character displayed in those dungeons by those fine men was the thing of beauty. I look back on those years as the beginning of wisdom, learning everything a man can learn about the vulnerabilities and the strengths that are ours as Americans. Why am I here tonight? I am here because I have in my brain and in my heart what it takes to lead America through tough times.
Thank you, Admiral. I thought, since you're running for vice president, that we ought to start off by talking about the vice presidency itself. The vice president presides over the Senate. He casts the deciding vote in case of a tie, but his role really depends on the assignments that are given to him by the president. However, if a president should die in office or is unable to serve for any other reason, the vice president automatically becomes president, and that has happened 5 times in this century. So the proposition I put on the table for you to discuss is this. What role would each of you like to play as vice president? What areas interest you? And what are your qualifications to serve as president if necessary? In the case of Vice President Quayle, who we're starting with, I suppose you tell us the role that you did play in the first term and what you'd like to do in the second term. Go ahead, sir.
Well, then I won't give you that answer. Qualifications. I've been there, Hal. I've done the job. I've been tested. I've been vice president for 4 years. Senator Gore referred to us being elected to the Congress together in 1976. I've done the job. I've done many things for the president. But even as vice president, you never know exactly what your role is going to be from time to time. And let me just give you an example of where I was tested under fire and in a crisis. President Bush was flying to Malta in 1989 to meet with President Gorbachev. It was the first meeting between President Bush and President Gorbachev. They had known each other before. A coup broke out in the Philippines. I had to go to the Situation Room. I had to assemble the president's advisors. I talked to President Aquino. I made the recommendation to the president. The president made the decision. The coup was suppressed. Democracy continued in the Philippines. The situation was ended. I've been there, and I'll tell you one other thing that qualifies you for being president, and it's this, Hal. You got to stand up for what you believe in. And nobody has ever criticized me for not having strong beliefs.
Admiral Stockdale.
My association with Mr. Perot is a very personal one. And as I have stood in and finally taken his running mate position, he has granted me total autonomy. I don't take advantage of it, but I am sure that he would make me a partner in decisions, in making decisions about the way to handle health care, the way to get this economy back on its feet again, in every way. I have not had the experience of these gentlemen, but to be any more specific, but I know I have his trust, and I intend to act in a way to keep that situation alive. Thank you.
Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton understands the meaning of the words teamwork and partnership. If we're successful in our efforts to gain your trust and lead this nation, we will work together to put our country back on the right track again. The experience that George Bush and Dan Quayle have been talking about includes the worst economic performance since the Great Depression. Unemployment is up, personal income is down, bankruptcies are up, housing starts are down. How long can we continue with trickle-down economics when the record of failure is so abundantly clear? Discussions of the vice presidency tend sometimes to focus on the crisis during which a vice president is thrust into the Oval Office, and indeed 1/3 of the vice presidents who have served have been moved into the White House. But the teamwork and partnership beforehand, and hopefully that situation never happens, how you work together is critically important. The way we work together in this campaign is one sample. Now, I'd like to say in response to Vice President Quayle, he talked about Malta and the Philippines. George Bush is concentrated on every other country in the world. When are you guys going to start worrying about our people here in the United States of America and get our country moving again.
Well, again, I will ask the audience, please do not applaud. It takes time from the candidates. All right. Now we have 5 minutes for discussion.
Well,
and go ahead, Vice President
The answer to
Quayle.
that is very simple. That we are not going to raise taxes to create new jobs. We have a plan to create new jobs, but that wasn't the question. The question dealt with qualifications. Teamwork and partnership may be fine in the Congress, Senator Gore. That's what Congress is all about: compromise, teamwork, working things out. But when you're President of the United States, or when you're Vice President, you have to fill in like I did the night of the crisis in the Philippines. You've got to make a decision. You've got to make up your mind. Bill Clinton, running for President of the United States, said this about the Persian Gulf War. He said, had I been in the Senate, I would have voted with the majority if it was a close vote. But I agreed with the arguments of the minority. You can't have it both ways. You have to make a decision. You cannot sit there in an international crisis and sit there and say, well, on one hand, this is okay, and on the other hand, this is okay. You've got to make the decision. President Bush has made the decisions. He's been tested. He's got the experience. He's got the qualification. He's got the integrity to be our president for the next 4 years.
Admiral Stockdale, it's your turn to respond next, and then Senator Gore will have his chance to respond.
Okay, I thought this was just an open session, this 5-minute thing, and I didn't have anything to add to his, but I will...
Well, I'll jump in if you don't...
I thought anyone could jump in whenever they wanted to.
Okay, whatever pleases you, gentlemen, is fine with me.
I'll let y'all figure out...
But I want Admiral Stockdale's time.
This is not the Senate. This is not the Senate where you can trade off time. Go ahead,
I'll
Senator
let y'all
Gore.
figure out the rules. I've got some points that I want to make here, and I still haven't gotten an answer to my question on when you guys are going to start worrying about this country, but I want to elaborate on it before...
Why doesn't the Democratic Congress pass the Business Jobs Bill?
Let him say his thoughts, and then you can come in.
Letting you get off that string of attacks. We've been listening to trickle-down economics for 12 years now, and y'all still support trickle-down to the very last drop. And you know, talking about this point of concentrating on every other country in the world as opposed to the people of our country right here at home, when George Bush took former Secretary of State Baker out of the State Department and put him in charge of the campaign and made him Chief of Staff in the White House, Mr. Baker, who's quite a capable man, said that for these last 4 years, George Bush was working on the problems of the rest of the world, and in the next 4 years, he would target America. Well, I want you to know we really appreciate that, but Bill Clinton and I will target America from day one. We won't wait 4 years before we concentrate on the problems in this country. He went on to say that it's really amazing what George Bush can do when he concentrates. Well, it's time that we had a president like Bill Clinton who can concentrate and will concentrate and work on the problems of real people in this country. You know, our country is in trouble. We simply cannot continue with this philosophy of giving huge tax cuts to the very wealthy, raising taxes on middle-income families the way Bush and Quayle have done, and then waiting for it to work. How much longer will it take, Dan, for trickle-down economics to work in your theory?
Well, we're going to have plenty of time to talk about trickle-down government, which you're for.
Well, I'd like to hear the answer.
But the question is, which you have failed to address, and that is, why is Bill Clinton qualified to be President of the United States? You've talked about Jim Baker. You've talked about trickle-down economics. You've talked about the worst economy in 50 years. You haven't told us one reason why Bill Clinton is qualified to be President of the United States.
I'll be happy to answer.
I want to go back and make a point.
Well, you've asked me a question. If you don't answer my question, I will answer yours.
I've made a statement. I have not asked a question. I've made a statement that you have not told us why Bill Clinton is qualified to be President of the United States. I pointed out what he said about the Persian Gulf War. But let me repeat it for you. Here's what he said, Senator. You know full well what he said.
You want me to answer your question?
I'm making a statement, then you can answer it.
All right. Can we give Admiral Stockdale a chance to come in here, please?
And again, audience... Here's what he said. If the vote... I mean, this is the Persian Gulf War, the most important event in his political lifetime. And here's what Bill Clinton says. If it was a close vote, I'd vote with the majority.
Let's give Admiral Stockdale a chance to come in.
That qualifies you for being President of the United States. I hope America is listening very closely to this debate tonight.
And I think America is seeing right now the reason this nation is in gridlock. The trickle downs and the tax and spends, or whatever you want to call them, are at swords points. We can't get this economy going. Over here we've got Dan, who's president, is going to take 8 years to balance the budget. And on my left, the senator, whose boss is going to get it halfway balanced in 4 years. Ross Perot has got a plan to balance the budget 5 years in length from start to finish. And we're people of the non-professional category who are just sick of this terrible thing that's happened to the country. And we've got a man who knows how to fix it, and I'm working for him.
I was a little bit worried that there might not be a free-flowing discussion tonight. Thanks for Let's move on to the economy. Specifically, the economy was talked about at great length the other night in the presidential debate. Let's talk about a very particular aspect of the economy, and that is getting people back to work. For the average person, the great fear is losing his or her job, and many Americans have lost jobs in this recession, which also means the loss of benefits, the loss of a home, a destruction of a family's security. Specifically, how would your administration go about getting people back to work, and how long is it going to take? And we start with Admiral Stockdale.
The lifeblood of our economy is investment. And right now, when we pay we borrow $350 billion a year, it saps the money markets, and the private investors are not getting their share. What we do is work on that budget by an aggressive program, not a painful program, so that we can start borrowing less money and getting more investment money on the street through entrepreneurs who can build factories, who will hire people, and maybe we'll start manufacturing goods here in this country again. That's my answer.
Okay, Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton's top priority is putting America back to work. Bill Clinton and I will create good, high-wage jobs for our people, the same way he has done in his state. Bill Clinton has created high-wage manufacturing jobs at 10 times the national average. And in fact, according to the statistics coming from the Bush-Quail Labor Department, for the last 2 years in a row, Bill Clinton's state has been #1 among all 50 in the creation of jobs in the private sector. By contrast, in the nation as a whole, during the last 4 years, it is the first time since the presidency of Herbert Hoover that we have gone for a 4-year period with fewer jobs at the end of that 4-year period than we had at the beginning. And look at manufacturing. We have lost 1.4 million jobs in manufacturing under George Bush and Dan Quayle. They have even, we learned 2 weeks ago, taken our tax dollars and subsidized the moving of U.S. factories to foreign countries. Now, don't deny it, because 60 Minutes and Nightline and the nation's newspapers have investigated this very carefully. When are you going to stop using our tax dollars to shut down American factories and move them to foreign countries and throw Americans out of work?
Vice President Quayle.
Senator, don't always believe what you see on television. Let me tell you, the media have been wrong before. We have never subsidized any country or any company to move from the United States to Latin America. You know full well the Caribbean Basin Initiative. You've supported that.
Nope.
That is a program there.
I voted against it.
You have voted for it in your record?
Nope.
Okay, well, we're going to have a lot of interesting debate after this debate. Our people will be glad to furnish the press, if they're interested, in Senator Gore's voting record on the Caribbean Basin Initiative. But let's talk, you keep talking about trickle-down economics and all this stuff about the worst economy since Hoover. It is a bad economy. It's a tough economy. The question isn't it's not who you're going to blame. What are you going to do about it? Your proposal is to raise $150 billion in taxes, to raise $220 billion in new spending.
No.
How is raising taxes going to help small business? How is raising taxes going to help the farmer? How is raising taxes going to help the consumer of America? I submit to you that raising taxes will make matters much, much worse.
Okay. Admiral We now throw it open for discussion. Admiral Stockdale, it's your turn to start the discussion.
Well, we've got to clean out the barn, if I may quote my boss, and start getting this investment money on the street so we can get and encourage entrepreneurs to build factories. The program is out there. It's a put together thing that requires some sacrifice, but not excessive. And we are willing to move forward on a 5-year clip to put us back where we can start over and get this nation straightened out.
Senator Gore?
Well,
getting people back to work.
The difference between the Perot-Stockdale plan and the Clinton-Gore plan is that Ross Perot's plan concentrates almost exclusively on balancing the budget and reducing the budget deficit. And the danger is that if that is the only goal, it could throw our nation back into an even worse recession. Bill Clinton and I have a detailed 5-year budget plan to create good jobs, cut the budget deficit in half, and eliminate the investment deficit in order to get our economy moving forward again. We have a $20 billion infrastructure fund to create a nationwide network of high-speed rail, for example, and what are called information superhighways to open up a whole universe of knowledge for our young people and to help our universities and companies that rely on new advances in the information revolution. We also have tax incentives for investment in job-creating activities, not the kind of encouragement for short-term rip-offs like the proposal that we have had from George Bush. But I want to return and say one more time, you have used our tax dollars to subsidize the recruitment of U.S. companies to move overseas and throw Americans out of work. In Decaturville, Tennessee, not very far from my home, a factory was shut down right there when they were solicited by officials paid with U.S. taxpayers' money, and then the replacement workers in a foreign country were trained with our tax dollars, and then their imports were subsidized coming back into the United States. When are you going to stop that program?
We do not have any program that encourages companies to close down here and to go and invest in foreign soil. That is absolutely outrageous. Of course American businesses do have business abroad. We've got global competition. We want the businesses to expand. Do you realize this, Senator? That every job that's overseas, there's 3 jobs back here to support that, but never have we ever, and nor would we, support the idea of someone closing down a factory here and moving overseas. That's just totally ridiculous.
It's going on right now. No, it happened in Tennessee, in Decaturville, Tennessee. When George Bush went to Nashville, the employees who lost their jobs asked to meet with them. I talked with them. Let me tell you what they're feeling. Some of them are in their 50s and 60s. They want to know where they're going to get new jobs when their jobs have been destroyed. And there are 1.4 million manufacturing jobs that have been lost because of the policies of you and George Bush. Are we going to, do you seriously believe that we ought to continue the same policies that have created the worst economy since the Great Depression?
I hope that when you talk to those people, you said, and the first thing that Bill Clinton and I are going to do is raise $150 billion in new taxes.
You've got that wrong, too.
And the first, that is part of your plan, $150 billion in new taxes? Well, you're going to disavow your plan.
Listen, what we're proposing...
You know what you're doing? You don't know what you're doing? You're pulling a Clinton. And you know what a Clinton is? And you know what a Clinton is? A Clinton is what he says one thing one day and another thing the next day. You try to have both sides of the issues. The fact of the matter is that you are proposing $150 billion in new taxes.
No.
And I hope that you talk to the people in Tennessee and told them that you're going to have new taxes.
You can say it all you want, but it doesn't make it true.
I hope you talked to them about you were going to increase spending at $220 billion. I'm sure what you didn't talk to them about was about how we're going to reform the health care system, like the president wants to do. He wants to go out and to reform the health care system so that every American will have available to them affordable health insurance. I'm sure one other thing that you didn't talk to him about, Senator, and that is legal reform. Because your position on legal reform is the status quo. And yet you talk about foreign competition. Why should an American company have to spend 15 to 20 times on product liability insurance costs compared to a company in Japan or a company in Germany or somewhere else. That's not right. We have product liability reform legislation on Capitol Hill that will create jobs, and the Democratic Congress won't pass it.
Okay. I think it's time to move on to our next topic. All three of you gentlemen have some expertise in defense and the armed forces. Vice President Quayle and Senator Gore both served on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Admiral Stockdale, of course, has a very distinguished military career. With the end of the Cold War, everyone agrees that there's going to be major cuts that are already started in the defense budget. But this country has a long history of neglecting its military needs in peacetime, then paying for it with heavy casualties when we're caught unprepared. How much of a defense cut is safe? What happens to the people who are forced to leave the military services, or if they lose their jobs because they're working in defense industries? I think we start with Senator Gore this time.
Bill Clinton and I support a strong national defense. He and I have both fought for change within the Democratic Party as well as within the country. In the aftermath of the Cold War, the definition of strong national defense has obviously changed somewhat. For example, George Bush wants to maintain at least 150,000 American soldiers in Europe, even though World War II ended 50 years ago. Bill Clinton and I agree with so many military experts who believe that it is time for the Europeans, who are so much wealthier now and more powerful than they were at the end of World War II, to start picking up a little more of that tab themselves and not rely so exclusively on the United States taxpayers for the defense of Europe. We believe that we can make savings in our defense budget and at the same time improve our national security. Now, for those who are affected by the cutbacks, whether they come from George Bush or Bill Clinton and me, the difference is Bill Clinton and I have a defense conversion program so that those who won the Cold War will not be left out in the cold. We want to put them to work, building an infrastructure and an economy here in this country for the 90s and the next century.
Vice President Quayle.
We won the Cold War because we invested in national security. We won the Cold War because we invested in our military. We didn't win we won the Cold War because America had the political will and made the right decisions. Yes, we can make the cuts in defense, and we have. Bill Clinton wants to cut defense another $60 billion. I'd say to the defense workers in California and elsewhere, $60 billion defense cut is going to cut a lot of jobs out. Yes, we are making a conversion, and we can go to a civil space rather than having a defense or the defense industry. But let me say this: we would not have won the Cold War if we had listened to Senator Gore and his crowd and had supported a nuclear freeze. If you would have supported that attitude, we would not have won the Cold War. We won the Cold War because we invested and we went forward.
Okay.
Admiral
Stockdale,
yes,
please.
Thank you. The numbers in terms of the dollar cuts as they stand on our plans now show us almost the same as the Vice President's. But we note that Governor Clinton's plan is almost twice as much a cut as either one of us. I've been through the end of World War II and the surprise beginning of Korea to see how it cost us more money because we overcut the defense budget in the first place. I don't say that. So I think that should be eyed with great suspicion. People that are really kicking the props out from under our grand military establishment prematurely. Now, there's other differences between the Perot approach and what we see up here on either side of me, and that has to do with we want to focus our interests, economic and military, more to the Pacific. We figure that we are generally going along with any sort of a troop removal from Europe. So that's still another face of this puzzle.
Okay, Senator Gore, would you like to start the discussion period on this
I'd like
topic?
to respond first to you, Admiral Stockdale. Under the details of our 5-year budget plan, we do propose more in defense cuts than George Bush and Dan Quayle, but only 5% more. Admiral Crow, who I think was one of your classmates in Annapolis, has endorsed the military portions of our plan, even though he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs under George Bush. And John White has endorsed the economic aspects of our plan, even though I believe he was the architect of Ross Perot's economic plan. Now, when I heard George Bush say at the convention in Houston that when he heard the phrase, "we won the Cold War," it made him wonder who the "we" was. Well, I want to tell you, President Bush, the "we" is the people of the United States of America. This wasn't a partisan victory that came suddenly a few months after you took the oath of office. This started with Harry Truman, and it was a bipartisan effort from the very beginning. George Bush taking credit for the Berlin Wall coming down is like the rooster taking credit for the sunrise. Now, and I want to add one other thing, because in the debate a few nights ago, I think President Bush made a very serious misstatement of fact in response to Ross Perot. It was a kind of a little lecture he gave to Ross Perot when he said, "Those SS-18s are gone, Ross. That's done." He reached a deal with Boris Yeltsin to completely remove them so we can all sleep safely without any fear tonight. But you know what? They thought they were going to get that deal, but when he took the person in charge of the negotiations out of the State Department and put him in charge of the re-election campaign, the deal unraveled, and now there is no start to deal at all. In fact, there are serious problems. Isn't it a fact, Dan, that every single one of those SS-18s is still there in the silos, and under the START 1 treaty, only half of the silos are supposed to be dismantled, and there is no deal to get rid of the other half. Didn't the President make a mistake there?
Vice President Quayle,
The President does have a commitment from Boris Yeltsin to eliminate the SS-18s. That is a commitment.
Is it an agreement?
It is a commitment, and well, let's talk about.
Well, he said it's done.
Let him talk, Senator.
Just lighten up here, Al.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about getting agreements. You know, the President of the United States doesn't just negotiate with your friends in Congress. The President of the United States deals on the international scene. He's got to deal with the President of Russia. He's got to deal with the Chancellor of Germany, Prime Minister of Britain, President of France, Prime Minister of Japan. He's got to deal with a whole host of leaders around the world. And the leaders sit down and they will negotiate and they will come to agreements with people that they trust. And this is a fundamental problem with Bill Clinton, is trust and character. It is not the issue of how he avoided military service 20-some years ago. It's the fact. It's the fact that he does not tell the truth about it. He first said he didn't get an induction notice, then we find out that he did. He said he didn't have an ROTC slot, then we find out he did. He said he didn't use Senator Fulbright's office for special influence, then we find out that he did. These are inconsistencies. Bill Clinton has trouble telling the truth, and he will have a very difficult time dealing with somebody like President Yeltsin or Chancellor Kohl or Prime Minister Major or President Mitterrand, because truth and integrity are prerequisites to being President of the United States.
I want to respond to that. George Bush, in case you've forgotten, Dan, said, "Read my lips, no new taxes."
Read my lips.
And you know what?
I didn't think I was going to hear that tonight.
Hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
He also said he wanted to be the environmental president. Then he went on to say he wanted to be the education president. Then he said that he wouldn't raise taxes again. No, never, ever, ever. Then the next day, his spokesman, Marlin Fitzwater, came out and said, "That's not a pledge." Then 2 weeks ago, he said that after the election, if you win, then James Baker's going to go back to be Secretary of State. Then a week later, in the debate a few nights ago, he said, no, after the election, if we win, James Baker is going to be in charge of domestic policy. Which is it, Dan? Is he going to What's your role in this going to be?
Well, we'll have to move on to another topic. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President. No,
I don't have time to respond to that.
You'll get plenty of chance to respond, so don't worry.
I was, okay, you're the moderator. I was under the assumption that when they like that,
we
you
ran
had a
out of
chance to
time
respond.
according to the agreement. It's time to move
Well,
on, and I want to stick to the agreement.
You got the last word on that, but we'll come back to it.
But you'll have a chance. I can see what's happening here. We throw out the topic, and then we drift, but that's okay, because I think it's making for a healthy exchange. The only thing I would ask
I'm enjoying it.
The only thing I would ask of you gentlemen is when we get to the discussion period, whoever talks first, be considerate of the others, because you have a tendency to filibuster. Okay, let's go on.
Look over there.
Okay. I'm not pointing any fingers. Let's talk about the environment. We'll get away from controversy. Everyone wants a safe and clean environment. But there's an ongoing conflict between environmental protection and the need for economic growth and jobs. So the point I throw out on the table is, how do you resolve this conflict between protection of the environment and growth and jobs? And why has it taken so long to deal with basic problems such as toxic waste dumps, clean air, and clean water? And Vice President Quayle, it's your turn to start first.
Hal, that's a false choice. You don't have to have a choice between the environment and jobs. You can have both. Look at the president's record. Clean air legislation passed the Democratic Congress because of the leadership of George Bush. It is the most comprehensive Clean Air Act in our history. We are firmly behind preserving our environment, and we have a good record with which to stand. The question comes about what is going to be their position when it comes to the environment. I say it's a false choice. You ought to ask somebody in Michigan, a UAW worker in Michigan, if they're thinking increasing the CAFE standards, the fuel economy standards to 45 miles a gallon is a good idea. 300,000 people out of work. You ought to talk to the timber people in the Northwest, where they say that, well, we can only save the oil, forget about jobs. You ought to talk to the coal miners. They're talking about putting a coal tax on. They're talking a tax on utilities, a tax on gasoline, home heating oil, all sorts of taxes. No, Hal, the choice isn't the environment and jobs. With the right policies, prudent policies, we can have both.
Admiral Stockdale.
I read Senator Gore's book about environment, and I don't see how he could possibly pay for his proposals in today's economic climate. The Marshall Plan of Environment and so forth. And also, I'm told by some experts that the things that he fears most may not be all that dangerous, according to some scientists. You can overdo, I'm told, environmental cleaning up. If you purify the pond, the water lilies die. I love this planet, and I want it to stay here, but I don't like to have it the private property of fanatics that want to overdo this thing.
Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton and I believe we can create millions of new jobs by leading the environmental revolution instead of dragging our feet and bringing up the rear. You know, Japan and Germany are both openly proclaiming to the world now that the biggest new market in the history of world business is the market for the new products and technologies that foster economic progress without environmental destruction. Why is the Japanese business organization, the largest one they have, the Keidan-Ren, arguing for tougher environmental standards than those embodied in U.S. law? Why is MITI, their trade organization, calling on all Japanese corporations everywhere in the world to exceed by as much as possible the environmental standards of every country in which they're operating? Well, maybe they're just dumb about business competition, but maybe they know something that George Bush and Dan Quayle don't know, that the future will call for greater efficiency and greater environmental efficiency. This is an issue that touches my basic values. I'm taught in my religious tradition that we are given dominion over the earth, but we're required to be good stewards of the earth, and that means to take care of it. We're not doing that now under the Bush-Quayle policies. They have gutted the Clean Air Act. They have broken his pledge to be the environmental president. Bill Clinton and I will change that.
Okay, discussion period now. Again, leave time for each other, please. Vice President Quayle, go ahead.
Oh, I'm tempted to yield to Admiral Stockdale on this. But you know, the fact of the matter is that one of the proposals that Senator Gore has suggested is to have the taxpayers of America spend $100 billion a year on environmental projects in foreign countries.
Just not
foreign
true.
aid. Well,
Just
Senator,
not true.
it's in your book on
It's
page
not.
304.
No, it's not.
It is
No, it's
there.
not.
It is
No,
in
it's
your
not.
book. You know, Hal, I wanted to bring the Gore book tonight because I figured he was going to pull a Bill Clinton on me, and he has, because he's going to disavow what's in his book. It's in your book.
No.
It comes out to $100 billion of foreign aid for environmental projects.
All right, let's give him
now,
a chance to answer.
How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for an extra $100 billion of the taxpayers' money for this?
Dan, I appreciate you reading my book very much, but you've got it wrong.
No, I've got it right.
There's no such proposal. There is no such...
Okay, well, we'll find
Let him
out
talk,
afterwards.
Mr. Vice President. Let the Senator talk. Go ahead.
There is no such proposal. What I have called upon is a cooperative effort by the United States and Europe and Asia to work together in opening up new markets throughout the world for the new technologies that are necessary in order to reconcile the imperatives of economic progress with the imperatives of environmental protection. Take Mexico City for an example. They are shutting down factories right now, not because of their economy, but because they're choking to death on the air pollution. They're banning automobiles some days of the week. Now, what they want is not new laser-guided missile systems. What they want are new engines and new factories and new products that don't pollute the air and the water, but nevertheless allow them to have a decent standard of living for their people. Last year, 35% of our exports went to developing countries, countries where the population is expanding worldwide by as much as 1 billion people every 10 years. We cannot stick our heads in the sand and pretend that we don't face a global environmental crisis. Nor should we assume that it's going to cost jobs. Quite the contrary. We are going to be able to create jobs, as Japan and Germany are planning to do right now, if we have the guts to lead. Now, earlier we heard about the auto industry and the timber industry. There have been 250,000 jobs lost in the automobile industry during the Reagan-Bush-Quayle years. There have been tens of thousands of jobs lost in the timber industry. What they like to do is to point the finger of blame with one hand and hand out pink slips with the other hand. They've done a poor job both with the economy and the environment. It's time for a change.
Admiral Stockdale, did you have something you wanted to say here?
I know that I read where Senator Gore's mentor had disagreed with some of the scientific data that is in his book. How do you respond to those criticisms of that sort? Do you take this into account?
No, let me respond. Thank you, Admiral, for saying that. You're talking about Roger Revelle. His family wrote a lengthy letter saying how terribly he had been misquoted and had his remarks taken completely out of context just before he died. He believed up until the day he died. No, it's true. He died last year.
Please.
And just before he died, he co-authored an article which had statements taken completely out of context. In fact, the vast majority of the world's scientists, and they have worked on this extensively, believe that we must have an effort to face up to the problems we face with the environment. And if we just stick our heads in the sand and pretend that it's not real, we're not doing ourselves a favor. Even worse than that, we're telling our children and all future generations that we weren't willing to face up to this obligation. I believe that we have a mandate to try to solve this problem, particularly when we can do it while we create jobs in the process.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice President. There's still time.
Yep.
Not much, though.
I know it. We got to have a little equal time here now, Hal. In the book, you also suggest taxes on gasoline, taxes on utilities, taxes on carbon, taxes on timber. There's a whole host of taxes, and I don't believe raising taxes is the way to solve our environmental problems. When you talk about the bad situation in the auto industry, you seem to say that the answer is, well, I'll just make it that much worse by increasing the CAFE standards. Yes, the auto industry is hurting. It's been hurting for a long time. And increasing the CAFE standards to 45 miles per gallon, like you and Bill Clinton are suggesting, will put, as I said, 300,000 people out of work.
Okay, let's move on now. I would like to remind the audience of one thing. Trying to stop you from applauding may be a lost cause. I didn't say anything about hissing, but I do think it is discourteous. And there's no call for that, and it reflects badly on the candidate you're supporting. So let's knock that off. Let's go on to health care. Health care protection has become a necessity of life in our society. Yet, millions of Americans are not insured, and the cost of medical treatment is practically out of control. How do you propose to control these costs, and how are you going to provide access to health care for every American? Let's see, whose turn is it to go now? I think it's Admiral Stockdale's turn. Go first. Go ahead.
Well, we have excellent technical health care, but we don't administer it very well. And the escalating costs top any other budget danger on the horizon, I think. And what Mr. Perot has suggested is that we try to look at the incentives that are in our current way of doing business are what are killing us. There's no incentive for a hypochondriac not to go to Medicare every day. There is no incentive for a doctor to curtail the expensive tests because he's under threat of malpractice lawyers. And so we just have a web of wrong way incentives that has to be changed by some people who are in the medical profession and some other crafty people who know how to write contracts to change incentives or get the incentives situation under control.
Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton and I believe that if a criminal has the right to a lawyer, every American family ought to have the right to see a doctor of their own choosing when they need to see a doctor. There are almost 40 million Americans who work full-time today and yet have no health insurance whatsoever. We are proposing to change that, not with a government-run plan, not with new taxes, but with a new approach called managed competition. We are going to provide a standard health insurance package provided by private insurance companies and eliminate the duplication and red tape and overlap, and we're going to have cost controls to eliminate the unnecessary procedures that are costing so much money today. There was a bipartisan commission, evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats, who looked at our plan and the Bush-Quail proposal. They said ours will save tens of billions of dollars and cover every American. The Bush proposal, by contrast, will cost us tens of billions and still leave Americans uninsured. But what I want to know is, why has George Bush waited for 3.5 years during this health insurance crisis before finally coming out with a proposal just before the election, and he still hasn't introduced it in Congress? Why the long wait, Dan?
Vice President?
Al, President Bush has had his health care reform agenda on the Capitol Hill for 8 months. He's had parts of it up there for years. You talk about increasing costs that the President has had on Capitol Hill, medical malpractice reform legislation for several years. Defensive medicine and health care today costs $20.7 billion. Defensive medicine defined as testing and treatment that is only necessary in case of a lawsuit. Wouldn't that be nice to take $20.7 billion that we're putting into our legal system and put it to preventive health care or women's health care or something else besides trial lawyers? But no, you don't want to reform the health care system to drive down costs through medical malpractice. What you're doing, you are talking about a government program. Your program is to ration health care. You said in your statement to see a doctor when you want to see a doctor. When you start rationing health care, there's going to be a waiting line to see a doctor unless it's an emergency. Remember when we rationed energy in this country? Waiting lines at the gasoline stations. The same thing would happen when you ration health care. The President's proposal deals with tax credits, deductions, and purchasing health care in the private sector and making health care affordable and available to every single American.
Admiral Stockdale, would you like to start the discussion period?
Well, I'm out of ammunition on this.
Well, let me talk then, because I've got a couple of things that I
Go
want
ahead,
to say.
Senator.
We still didn't get an answer to the question of why George Bush waited for 3.5 years
didn't wait for
during the
3.5 years.
national
I did answer
health
the question.
insurance crisis before he even made a proposal. And it still hasn't been submitted to Congress in the form of legislation. I also want to respond to the question about malpractice. Do you know which state has the lowest malpractice premiums in the entire country? Bill Clinton's Arkansas does, partly because he has passed reform measures limiting the time during which malpractice suits can be filed. In fact, tort claims generally have fallen 10% under Bill Clinton there. But you know, that's not the reason for this health insurance crisis. The reason is we've had absolutely no leadership. Let me tell you about a friend of mine named Mitch Philpott from Marietta, Georgia, not far from here, who Tipper and I met with his family in Johns Hopkins Hospital. Their son Brett was in the bed next to our son, and they couldn't their medical bills. They used to in Atlanta, but they lost their house. And while they were there, both Mitch and his wife lost their jobs because they could not get unpaid leave. We passed legislation to give family leave under circumstances like that, exempting small business. How can you talk about family values, Dan, and twice veto the Family Medical Leave Act?
Vice President?
Pass our Family Leave Act, and because it goes to small businesses where the major problem is your proposal excluded small business. That's the problem. Now let me talk about health care.
Did you require it? Did you require it?
My turn.
Did you require family
leave? Lighten up, Al. My turn.
It's a free discussion.
Take a breath, Al. Inhale.
It's a free discussion. Did you require family leave in that legislation, yes or no?
We offered incentives to small businesses, yes or no? Were small business exempted under your proposal?
Yes.
Yes, and that's where the biggest problem is.
Did you require it of anyone?
I'm going to get back to the topic
Did you require it of anyone?
Because he obviously doesn't want to talk about health insurance or health care, which you address. I was absolutely, I shouldn't say that. Another Clinton. You pulled another Clinton on me because here you go again. Medical malpractice legislation has been before the Congress of the United States, and you try to convince the American people that Bill Clinton is for tort reform. The biggest campaign contributors to your campaign are the trial lawyers of America. We have a letter, and we're going to release it again to the media if the media is interested, where the head of the trial lawyers of Arkansas said that Bill Clinton was basically in their back pocket, that Bill Clinton has always opposed tort reform of any kind. It's in the letter. We have it. We'll make it available because Bill Clinton is not for tort reform. I'd like to know where Bill Clinton stands on health insurance. When he's campaigning in New Hampshire, he says, I am for the pay-or-play health insurance. Pay or play, that's a 7 to 9% payroll tax on every worker in America that participates in this program.
Can I respond?
And then all of a sudden, this summer, he says, oh, I'm not for a pay or play. Here we go again. Bill Clinton, one day he's for pay or play, the next day he's against pay or play. He does it in education. He writes Polly Williams, a Democrat state legislator in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, saying, I'm for choice in education. Then he goes to the NEA Teachers Union and says, sorry, I'm not for choice in education because you won't let me be for choice in education. One time, Bill Clinton says, term limits. We ought to limit terms. It's ridiculous that a member of Congress can serve for 30, 40, 50 years and you limit the terms of the president, but that's another subject.
We're fixing to limit one.
Yeah. We're gonna limit. It's not going to be mine. It's going to be people like you and Kennedy and Metzenbaum and George Mitchell and the rest of that Democratic Congress on Capitol Hill. That's who we're talking about, and that's who the American people, in case, as you well know, you've got term limits for a president. You don't have term limits for Congress, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we don't.
I want to respond to some of this.
Here goes Bill Clinton again. He says, well, term limits, that's an interesting idea. I think I might be in favor of that. Then his Democratic friends in Congress say, no, Bill, you can't be for that. You know, Bill Clinton has trouble telling the truth.
I want to respond to some of this.
Tell the truth.
I want to respond, if I might.
Go ahead, Senator, quickly.
You know, in response to my question before that long laundry list, he said that they had their own family leave proposal. It was just like the proposal of your party back when Social Security was first proposed. You said, we're for it as long as it's voluntary. Same with Medicare. You said, we're for it so long as it's voluntary. Yeah. Civil rights, we're for it so long as it's voluntary.
Senator, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap this one up.
Family leave is important enough to be required.
Okay, thanks. Coming out of health care, again trying to avoid controversy, let's talk about the abortion debate. Abortion rights has been a bitter controversy in this country for almost 20 years. It's been heightened by the recent Supreme Court decisions. So I'll make it very simple in this question. Where do each of you stand on the issue? What action will your president's administration take on the abortion question? Will it be a factor in the appointment of federal judges, especially to the Supreme Court? And I believe that Senator Gore goes first.
Bill Clinton and I support the right of a woman to choose. That doesn't mean we're pro-abortion. In fact, we believe there are way too many abortions in this country, and the way to reduce them is by reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies, not vetoing family planning legislation the way George Bush has consistently done. The reason we are pro-choice and in favor of a woman's right to privacy is because we believe that during the early stages of a pregnancy, the government has no business coming in and ordering a woman to do what the government thinks is best. What Dan Quayle and George Bush and Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson think is the right decision in a given set of circumstances is their privilege. But don't have the government order a woman to do what they think is the right thing to do. We ought to be able to build more common ground among those who describe themselves as pro-choice and pro-life in efforts to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. But Dan, you can clear this up very simply by repeating after me, I support the right of a woman to choose. Can you say that?
Vice President Quayle, your turn.
Yeah. This issue is an issue that divides Americans deeply. I happen to be pro-life. I have been pro-life for my 16 years in public life. My objective and the President's objective is to try to reduce abortions in this country. We have 1.6 million abortions. We have more abortions in Washington, D.C. than we do live births. Why shouldn't we have more reflection on the issue before abortion, the decision of abortion is made? I would hope that we would agree upon that, something like a 24-hour waiting period, parental notification. I was in Los Angeles recently, and I talked to a woman who told me that she had an abortion when she was 17 years of age. And looking back on that, she said it was a mistake. She said, I wished at that time that I was going through this difficult time, that I had counseling to talk about the post-abortion trauma and talk about adoption rather than abortion. Because if I had had that discussion, I would have had the child. Let's not forget that every abortion stops a beating heart. I think we have far too many abortions in this country of ours.
Admiral Stockdale.
I believe that a woman owns her body, and what she does with it is her own business, period. Period.
That's it.
I too abhor abortions, but I don't think they should be made illegal, and I don't think it's a political issue. I think it's a privacy issue.
Admiral, you caught me by surprise. Let's go ahead with the discussion of this issue. Senator Gore?
Well, you notice in his response that Dan did not say, I support the right of a woman to choose. That is because he and George Bush have turned over their party to Pat Buchanan and Phyllis Schlafly, who have ordered them to endorse a platform which makes all abortions illegal under any circumstances, regardless of what has led to that decision by a woman. Even in cases of rape and incest, their platform requires that a woman be penalized, that she not be allowed to make a choice if she believes, in consultation with her family, her doctor, and others, whoever she chooses, that she wants to have an abortion after rape or incest. They
Senator,
make it completely illegal under any of those circumstances. Now they want to waffle around on it. Let me finish just briefly. Now you want to waffle around on it and give the impression that maybe you don't really mean what you say. But again, you can clear it up by simply repeating, I support the right of a woman to choose. Say it.
Let him say it himself. Let him say his own words. Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
Talk about waffling around. This issue is a very important issue. It has been debated throughout your public life and throughout my public life. And one thing that I don't think that is wise to do, and that is to change your position. At one time, and most of the time in the House of Representatives, you had a pro-life position.
Simply not
in
true.
1987, you wrote a letter, and we'll pass this out to the media too.
True.
You wrote a letter saying that you oppose taxpayer funding of abortion. Bill Clinton has the same type of a record.
In some circumstances.
No, we're going to qualify it now.
And I still do.
And Bill Clinton, when he was governor of Arkansas, also worked with the Right to Life people and supported Right to Life positions, and now he has changed. Talk about waffling around. This is the typical type of Clinton response, even on the issue like abortion. He's on both sides of the issue. Take the NAFTA agreement.
Oh, wait a minute.
How long did he have to just wait?
I know you want to change the subject, Dan, but let's stay on this one for a while.
How long did he have to wait, or how quickly did he change his position on education? He changes his position all the time.
Let's stay with this issue
Bill
for a while.
Clinton has trouble telling the truth. Three words he fears most.
Does anybody have any view about the appointment of judges on this?
Yeah, I want to talk about this because the question was not about free trade or education. The question was about.
You're the one that brought up the issue of waffling.
Dan,
I'll let you talk.
Let me talk now. It's going to be a long evening if you're like this now because.
No,
don't change the subject. Don't change the subject. Because what you have done.
Answer my questions. On the 24-hour waiting period, do you support that?
I have had the same position on abortion in favor of a woman's right to choose. Do you support a woman's right to choose?
Do you support a 24-hour waiting period to have reflection?
You're still avoiding the question. No, wait a minute. Let me tell you why this is so important. There are millions of women in this country who passionately believe in the right of a woman to privacy. And they want to stack the Supreme Court with justices who will take away the right to privacy. Make no mistake about it, that is their agenda. And if you support them, don't be surprised that that is exactly what they want to do. And that is why Dan Quayle refuses to say this evening that he supports the right of a woman to choose. I agree with Admiral Stockdale and the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans in this country. You know, one of the reasons so many Republicans are supporting the Clinton-Gore ticket is because they've turned over the party to this right-wing extremist group which takes positions on issues like abortion that don't even allow exceptions for rape and incest. Again, can't you just say you support the right of a woman to choose?
Can we give Admiral Stockdale a chance to jump in here if he wants to or if he dares to?
I would like to get in. I feel like I'm an observer at a ping pong game where they're talking about, they're expert professional politicians that massage these intricate plots and know every nuance to them. And meantime, we're facing a desperate situation in our economy. I've seen the cost of living double in my lifetime. A new granddaughter was born in my family, my granddaughter, 3 weeks ago. And according to the statistics that we have, that is the Perot group, the chances of her seeing a doubling of the standard of living are nil. In fact, her children will be dead before another this standard of living is doubled. So what the heck? Let's get on with talking about something substantive.
All right, Mr. Vice President, you'll have a chance to. You'll have a chance in the closing statements. Let's move on to another topic.
Just 15 seconds to respond.
Well, can I have 15 seconds also?
Let's move on, John.
I'll tell you what.
All right, let's not. We're not horse trading. We're having a debate. Let's go on. Let's talk about the cities, because that's where a majority of Americans live, in urban areas, and they're facing a financial and social crisis. They've lost sources of tax revenue. The aid that once came from the federal and state governments has been drastically cut. There's an epidemic of drugs, crime, and violence. Their streets, their schools are like war zones. It's becoming increasingly difficult to pay for public education, for transportation, for police and fire protection, the basic services that local government must provide. Now, everybody talks about enterprise zones. That may be part of the solution, but what else are your administrations really going to be willing to do to help the cities? Vice President Quayle, it's your turn to go first.
Well, hell, enterprise zones are important, and it's an idea that the President has been pushing. There's been very strong reluctance with the Democratic Congress. We'll continue to push it. We also want to have home ownership. I was at a housing project in San Francisco several months ago and met with people that were trying to reclaim their neighborhood. They wanted home ownership. They didn't want handouts. And I was with the Democrat mayor of San Francisco, who was there supporting our idea. But when you look at the cities and you see the problems we have, crime, drugs, lack of jobs, I also want to point out one of the fundamental problems that we have in our American cities and throughout America today, and that is the breakdown of the American family. I know some people laugh about it when I talk about the breakdown of the family, but it's true. 60% of the kids that are born in our major cities today are born out of wedlock. We have too many divorces. We have too many fathers that aren't assuming their responsibility. The breakdown of the family is a contributing factor to the problems that we have in urban America.
Admiral Stockdale.
I think enterprise zones are good, but I think the problem is deeper than that. I think we are, when I ran a civilization for several years, a civilization of 300 to 400 wonderful men. We had our own laws. We had practically our own constitution. And I was the sovereign for a good bit of that. And I tried to analyze human predicaments in that microcosm of life in the world. And I found out that when I really got down to putting out do's and don'ts, and lots of these included take torture for this and that and this and that, and never take any amnesty for reasons they all understood and went along with. But we had an acronym, BACK US, and each one of those BACK was something for which you had to make them hurt you before you did it. Bowing in public, getting on the radio and so forth. But at the end, it was US, BACK US. You got the double meaning there. But the US could be called the United States, but it was unity over self. Loners make out. Somehow we're going to have to get some love in this country between races and between rich and poor. You've got to have leaders, and they're out there who can do this with their bare hands, working with people on the scene.
Senator Gore, please.
George Bush's urban policy has been a tale of two cities. The best of times for the very wealthy, the worst of times for everyone else. We have seen a decline in urban America under the Bush-Quayle administration. Bill Clinton and I want to change that by creating good jobs, investing in infrastructure, new programs in job training and apprenticeship, welfare reform, to say to a mother with young children that if she gets a good job, her children are not going to lose their Medicaid benefits. Incentives for investment in the inner city area, and yes, enterprise zones. Vice President Quayle said they're important, but George Bush eliminated them from his urban plan. And then, when they were included in a plan that the Congress passed, George Bush vetoed the enterprise zone law, the law that included them, for one reason: because that same bill raised taxes on those making more than $200,000 $200,000 a year. Let's face up to it, Dan. Your top priority, really, isn't it, to make sure that the very wealthy don't have to pay any more taxes? We want to cut taxes on middle-income families and raise them on those making more than $200,000 a year. And if we can take our approach, the cities will be much better.
Okay, let's start the discussion period right here. Go ahead.
What plan is that that's just going to raise taxes on those making over $200,000 a year? You may call that your plan, but everyone knows that you simply can't get $150 billion in new taxes by raising the marginal tax rate to a top rate of 36% and only tax those making $200,000 a year. It's absolutely ridiculous. The top 2%, which you refer to, that gets you down to $64,000. Then you have about a $40 billion shortfall. That gets you down to $36,000 a year. Everybody making more than $36,000 a year will have their taxes increased if Bill Clinton is president of the United States. And I don't know how you're going to go to urban America and say that raising taxes is good for you. I don't know how you're going to go to urban America and say, well, the best thing that we want to, or the best thing that we can offer is simply to raise taxes again. This is nothing more than a tax and spend a platform. We've seen it before. It doesn't work. Let me tell you about a story.
Can I respond to some of that?
I've got a very good example.
Can I respond to some of that?
When we talk about families here. Because I was meeting with some former gang members in Phoenix, in Los Angeles, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. And when I talked to those former gang members, here's what they told me, why they joined the gang. They said, well, joining a gang is like joining a family. I said, joining a family? Yes, because the gang offered support, it offered leadership, it offered comfort. It was a way to get ahead. Where have we come if joining a gang is like being a member of the family? And that's why I think families have to be strengthened, and you don't strengthen the American family by raising taxes.
Go ahead.
I do want to respond to that.
Go ahead, Senator. Admiral.
George Bush and Dan Quayle want to protect the very wealthy. That is the group that has gotten all of the tax cuts under the Bush-Quayle administration. Nobody here who is middle income has gotten a tax cut, because middle income families have had tax increases under Bush and Quayle in order to finance the cuts for the very wealthy. That's what trickle-down economics is all about, and they want to continue it. We're proposing to also require foreign corporations to pay the same taxes that American corporations do when they do business here in the United States of America. George Bush has not been willing to enforce the laws and collect those taxes. We want to close that loophole and raise more money in that way.
And when you talk about,
excuse me?
Stick to the cities.
All right. Well, he talked about ways to raise money to help the cities. What we're proposing is to invest in the infrastructure in cities and have targeted tax incentives for investment right in inner city areas. The enterprise zones represent a part of our proposal also, and strengthening the family through welfare reform. And you know, the Bush administration has vetoed family leave. They have cut childhood immunization and college aid. If you don't support parents and you don't support children, how can you say you support families?
How about supporting parents and the right to choose where their kids go to school, Al? You support that? Let the parents, let the parents.
Do you want me to answer?
Public or private schools?
Want me to answer?
Go ahead.
We support the public school choice to go to any public school of your choice. What we don't support, and listen to what they're proposing, to take U.S. taxpayer dollars and subsidize private schools. Now, I'm all for private schools, but to use taxpayer dollars when the people who get these little vouchers often won't be able to afford the private school anyway, and the private school is not under any obligation to admit them, that is a rip-off of the U.S. taxpayer.
This is a very important issue. Choice in education is a very important issue. And he said that he was not for choosing to, giving the parents the right to choose to send their kids to public schools. But it's okay for the wealthy to choose to send their kids to private schools, but it's not okay for the middle class and the working poor to choose where they want to send their kids to school. I think that it's time that all parents in America have a right to choose where they send their kids to school to get an education.
Admiral Stockdale, would you like to have the last word in this period?
I come down on the side of freedom of school choice. And there's a lot of misunderstandings that I've heard here tonight that I may have the answer to. Starting in, you know, for the last almost a decade, we've worried about our schools officially through Washington, and the president had a meeting of all the governors, and then they tried the conventional fixes for schools, that is to increase the certification of requirements for the teachers, to lengthen the school day, to lengthen the school year. Nothing, this is a very brief overview of the thing, but nothing happened. And it's time to change the school structure. In schools, bureaucracy is bad and autonomy is good. The only good schools we have are those run by talented principals and devoted teachers. And they're running their own show. How many times have I thrived? You know, the best thing I had when I ran that civilization, it succeeded, and it's a landmark. The best thing I had going for me was I had no contact with Washington for all those years.
No, we have to go on. What I'm about to say doesn't apply to the debate tonight. It applies to the campaign that's been going on outside this auditorium. With 3 weeks to go, this campaign has at times been very ugly, with the tone being set by personal negative attacks. As candidates, how does it look from your viewpoint? And are these tactics really necessary? Admiral Stockdale, it's your turn to go.
You know, I didn't have my hearing aid turned on. Tell me again.
I was saying that at times this campaign has been very ugly with personal negative attacks. As a candidate, how does it look from where you are, and are these tactics really necessary?
Nasty attacks. Well, I think there is a case to be made for putting emphasis on character over these issues that we have been batting back and forth and have a life of their own. Sure, you have to know where you're going with your government, but character is the big variable in the success. The character of the leaders is the big variable in the success, long-term success of an administration. I went to a friend of mine in New York some years ago, and he was the president of a major network, TV network, and he said, you know, I think we have messed up this election process. It was an election year by stressing that putting out the dogma that issues are the thing to talk about, not character. He said, I felt so strongly about this, I went back and read the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Read those debates. How do they come down? Douglas is all character. He knows all of the little stinky numbers these guys do. Abraham Lincoln had character. Thank God we got the right president in the Civil War. But that is a question that is a valid one. And, you know, I would like to brag about the character of my boss.
Senator Gore.
This election is about the future of our country, not about personal attacks against one candidate or another. Our nation is in trouble, and it is appalling to me that with 10 million Americans out of work, with the rest working harder for less money than they did 4 years ago, with the loss of 1.4 million manufacturing jobs in our nation, with a health care crisis, a crisis of crime and drugs and AIDS, substandard education, that George Bush would constantly try to level personal attacks at his opponent. Now, this, of course, just reached a new low last week when he resorted to a classic McCarthyite technique of trying to smear Bill Clinton over a trip that he took as a student, along with lots of other Rhodes Scholars who were invited to go to Russia. It's a classic McCarthyite smear technique. I think the President of the United States ought to apologize. I think that he insulted the intelligence of the American people, and I'm awful proud that the American people rejected that tactic so overwhelmingly that he decided he had made a mistake. Do you think it was a mistake too, Dan?
Okay. Vice President Quayle.
Let me answer the question. Hal, you said, and I wrote it down here, personal negative attacks. Has anyone been reading my press clippings for the last 4 years? But I agree with one thing on with Senator Gore, and that is that we ought to look to the future. and the future is who's going to be the next president of the United States. And is it a negative attack and a personal attack to point out that Bill Clinton simply has trouble telling the truth? You know, he said that he didn't organize, or he didn't even demonstrate. He told the people in Arkansas in 1978, then we found out he organized demonstrations. You know, I don't care whether he demonstrated or didn't demonstrate. The question is, tell the truth. Just tell us the truth. Today, Bill Clinton, or excuse me, yesterday in Philadelphia on a radio show, just yesterday on a radio show, he attacks Admiral, he attacks Ross Perot, saying the media is giving Ross Perot a free ride. The press asked him, when the Klieg lights are on, said, what do you mean by Ross Perot getting a free ride? And he says, I didn't say that at all. I mean, you can't have it both ways. No, I don't think that is a personal attack. What I find troubling with Bill Clinton is he can't tell the truth. You cannot lead this great country of ours by misleading the people.
All right, gentlemen, the control room advises me that in order to have time for your closing statements, which we certainly want, there simply is not going to be time for a discussion period on this particular topic. So let's go to the closing statements. You have 2 minutes each, and we'll start with Admiral Stockdale.
I think the best justification for getting Ross Perot in the race again and to stay is that we're seeing this kind of chit-chat back and forth about issues that don't concentrate on where our grandchildren are going, with the living standards of our children and grandchildren. He is, as I've read in more than one article, a revolutionary. He's got plans out there that are going to double the speed at which this budget problem is being cared for. It was asked how, if we would squeeze down so fast that we would strangle the economy in the process. That is an art to follow all those variables and know when to let up and to nurse this economy back together with pulls and pushes. And that there's no better man in the world to do that than that old artist Ross Perot. And so I think that my closing statement is that I think I'm in a room with people that aren't living the life of reality. The world the United States is in deep trouble. We've got to have somebody that can get up there and bring out the fire hoses and get it stopped. And that's what we're about in the Perot campaign.
Thank you. Senator Gore, your closing statement, sir?
3 weeks from today, our nation will make a fateful decision. We can continue traveling the road we have been on, which has led to higher unemployment and worse economic times, or we can reach out for change. If we choose change, it will require us to reach down inside ourselves to find the courage to take a new direction. Sometimes it seems deceptively easy to continue with the old habits even when they're no longer good for us. Trickle-down economics simply does not work. We have had an increase in all of the things that should be decreasing. Everything that should have been increasing has been going down. We have got to change direction. Bill Clinton offers a new approach. He has been named by the other 49 governors, Republicans and Democrats alike, as the best and most effective governor in the entire United States of America. He's moved 17,000 people off the welfare rolls and onto payrolls. He has introduced innovations in health care and education. And again, he has led the nation for the last 2 years in a row in the creation of jobs in the private sector. Isn't it time for a new approach, a new generation of ideas and leadership to put our nation's people first and to get our economy moving again? We simply cannot stand to continue with this failed approach that is no good for us. Ultimately, it is a choice between hope and fear, a choice between the future and the past. It is time to reach out for a better nation. We are bigger than George Bush has told us we are as a nation, and we have a much brighter future. Give us a chance. With your help, we'll change this country, and we can't wait to get started.
Vice President Quayle.
Thank you, Hal. I'd like to use this closing statement to talk to you about a few people that I've met in these last 4 years. Think of a woman in Chicago when I was talking to parents about education, where she stood up and said, "I'm sick and tired of these schools and this city being nothing but a factory for failure." And that's why we support choice in education. I was in Beaumont, Texas, and met with small business people, and they wanted to reform the civil justice system because they think our legal system costs too much and there's too much of a delay in getting an answer. I was in Middletown, Ohio, talking to a welfare woman where she said, "I want to go back to work and I had a job offered to me, but I'm not going to take it because I have 2 children at home and the job that is offered to me doesn't have health insurance." Under President Bush's health care reform package, that woman won't have to make a choice about going back to work or health care for her children because she'll have both. I was in Vilnius, Lithuania, Independence Square, speaking to 10,000 people in the middle of winter. Hundreds of people came up to me and said, "God bless America." Yes, in the next 4 years, as I said, somewhere, sometime, there's going to be a crisis. And you need to have a president that is qualified, has the experience, and has been tested. Not one time during this evening, during 90 minutes, did Al Gore tell us why Bill Clinton is qualified to be president. He never answered my charges that Bill Clinton has trouble telling the truth. The choice is yours. The American people should demand that their president tell the truth. Do you really believe Bill Clinton will tell the truth? And do you trust Bill Clinton to be your president?
That concludes this vice presidential debate. I'd like to thank Vice President Quayle, Senator Gore, Admiral Stockdale for being participants. The next presidential debate is scheduled for this Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time at the University of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia. To all
Only on hard copy.
Friday at 4:30 on KARE 11.
Fraser and Son visit Sammy's Playhouse next time on Cheers.
Regularly scheduled programming will not be seen at this time, so that we may bring you the following NBC News special.
The presidential debates, round 2. George Bush, Bill Clinton, Ross Perot. Tonight, questioned by the people.
From Richmond, Virginia, NBC News Decision 92, the presidential debates. Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening from the University of Richmond, where tonight the candidates and the voters mix it up in a freewheeling format that's never been tried before. This evening will be part debate, part game show, part talk show, and all important, with the election just 2 weeks from next Tuesday. The candidates will be coming onto the stage momentarily. They'll be sitting in some tall chairs, but they will not be confined to them. They can go out into the audience and go one-on-one with the people who will be questioning. Ross Perot, Bill Clinton, and President Bush now coming in. They can leave their chairs, as I say, for questions and interrupt each other, indeed butt in. The moderator tonight is Carol Simpson of ABC News.
Good evening and welcome to the second of 3 presidential debates between the major candidates for President of the United States. The candidates are the Republican nominee, President George Bush, the Independent, Ross Perot, and Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee. My name is Carol Simpson, and I will be the moderator for tonight's 90-minute debate, which is coming to you from the campus of the University of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia. Now, tonight's program is unlike any other presidential debate in history. We're making history now, and it's pretty exciting. An independent polling firm has selected an audience of 209 uncommitted voters from this area. The candidates will be asked questions by these voters on a topic of their choosing, anything they want to ask about. My job as moderator is to, take care of the questioning, ask questions myself if I think there needs to be continuity and balance, and sometimes I might ask the candidates to respond to what another candidate may have said. Now, the format has been agreed to by representatives of both the Republican and Democratic campaigns. And there is no subject matter that is restricted. Anything goes. We can ask anything. After the debate, the candidates will have an opportunity to make a closing statement. So, President Bush, I think you said it earlier, let's get it on.
Let's go.
And I think the first question is over here.
Yes, I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Perot. What will you do as president to open foreign markets to fair competition from American business and to stop unfair competition here at home from foreign countries so that we can bring jobs back to the United States?
That's right at the top of my agenda. We've shipped millions of jobs overseas, and we have a strange situation because we have a process in Washington where after you've served for a while, you cash in, become a foreign lobbyist, make $30,000 a month, then take a leave, work on presidential campaigns, make sure you got good contacts, and then go back out. Now, if you just want to get down to brass tacks, first thing you ought to do is get all these folks who've got these one-way trade agreements that we've negotiated over the years and say, fellas, we'll take the same deal we gave you. And they'll gridlock right at that point because, for example, we've got international competitors who simply could not unload their cars off the ships if they had to comply. You see, if it was a two-way street, just couldn't do it. We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. To those of you in the audience who are business people, pretty simple. If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, hire a young 25, that's assuming you've been in business for a long time, you've got a mature workforce. Pay $1 an hour for your labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element in making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south. So if the people send me to Washington, the first thing I'll do is study that 2,000-page agreement and make sure it's a two-way street. One last point here. I decided I was dumb and didn't understand it, so I called a who's who of the folks who've been around it. And I said, why won't everybody go south? They said, we'll be disruptive. I said, for how long? I finally got them up for 12 to 15 years. And I said, well, how does it stop being disruptive? And that is when their jobs come up from $1 an hour to $6 an hour and ours go down to $6 an hour, then it's leveled again. But in the meantime, you've wrecked the country with these kinds of deals. We've got to cut it out.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. I see that the president has stood up, so he must have something to say about this.
Carol, the thing that saved us in this global economic slowdown has been our exports. And what I'm trying to do is increase our exports. And if indeed all the jobs were going to move south because they're lower wages now, and they haven't done that. And so I have just negotiated with the President of Mexico the North American Free Trade Agreement and the Prime Minister of Canada, I might add. And I want to have more of these free trade agreements because export jobs are increasing far faster than any jobs that may have moved overseas. That's a scare tactic because it's not that many. But anyone that's here, we want to have more jobs here. And the way to do that is to increase our exports. Some believe in protection. I don't. I believe in free and fair trade, and that's the thing that saved us. And so I will keep on as president trying to get a successful conclusion to the GATT round, the big Uruguay round of trade, which will really open up markets for our agriculture particularly. I want to continue to work after we get this NAFTA agreement ratified this coming year. I want to get one with Eastern Europe. I want to get one with Chile. And free and fair trade is the answer, not protection. And as I say, we've had tough economic times, and it's exports that have saved us, exports that have built.
Governor Clinton.
I'd like to answer the question because I've actually been a governor for 12 years, so I've known a lot of people who've lost their jobs because of jobs moving overseas, and I know a lot of people whose plants have been strengthened by increasing exports. The trick is to expand our export base and to expand trade on terms that are fair to us. It is true that our exports to Mexico, for example, have gone up and our trade deficit's gone down. It's also true that just today a record high trade deficit was announced with Japan. So what is the answer? Let me just mention 3 things very quickly. Number 1, make sure that other countries are as open to our markets as our markets are to them. And if they're not, have measures on the books that don't take forever and a day to implement. Number 2, change the tax code. There are more deductions in the tax code for shutting plants down and moving them overseas than there are for modernizing plant and equipment here. Our competitors don't do that. Emphasize and subsidize modernizing plant and equipment here, not moving plants overseas. Number 3, stop the federal government's program that now gives low-interest loans and job training funds to companies that will actually shut down and move to other countries, but we won't do the same thing for plants that stay here. So more trade, but on fair terms, and favor investment in America.
Thank you. I think we have a question over here.
Yeah, this is for Governor Clinton. In the real world, that is outside of Washington, D.C., compensation and achievement are based on goals defined and achieved. The deficit is my question is about the deficit. Would you define in specific dollar goals how much you would reduce the deficit in each of the 4 years of a Clinton administration, and then enter into a legally binding contract with the American people that if you did not achieve those goals, that you would not seek a second term? Answer yes or no, and then comment on your answer, please.
No, and here's why. And I'll tell you exactly why. Because the deficit now has been building up for 12 years. I'll tell you exactly what I think can be done. I think we can bring it down by 50% in 4 years and grow the economy. Now, I could get rid of it in 4 years, in theory, on the books now, but to do it, you'd have to raise taxes too much and cut benefits too much to people who need them, and it would even make the economy worse. Mr. Perot will tell you, for example, that the expert he hired to analyze his plan says that it will bring the deficit down in 5 years, but it will make unemployment bad for 4 more years. So my view is, sir, you have to increase investment, grow the economy, and reduce the deficit by controlling health care costs, prudent reductions in defense, cuts in domestic programs, and asking the wealthiest Americans and foreign corporations to pay their fair share of taxes, and investing and growing this economy. I ask everybody to look at my economic ideas. 9 Nobel Prize winners and over 500 economists and hundreds of business people, including a lot of Republicans, said this is the way you got to go. If you don't grow the economy, you can't get it done. But I can't foresee all the things that will happen, and I don't think a president should be judged solely on the deficit. Let me also say, we're having an election today. You'll have a shot at me in 4 years, and you can vote me right out if you think I've done a lousy job. And I would welcome you to do that.
Mr. President.
Well, I'm a little confused here because I don't see how you can grow the deficit down by raising people's taxes. You see, I don't think the American people are taxed too little. I think they're taxed too much. I went for 1 tax increase, and when I make a mistake, I admit it. So that wasn't the right thing to do. Governor Clinton's program wants to tax more and spend more. $150 billion in new taxes, spend another 220. I don't believe that's the way to do it. Here's some things that'll help. Give us a balanced budget amendment. He always talks about Arkansas having a balanced budget, and they do. But he has a balanced budget amendment, have to do it. I'd like the government to have that. And I think it would discipline not only the Congress, which needs it, but also the executive branch. I'd like to have what 43 governors have, the line item veto. So if the Congress can't cut, and we've got a reckless spending Congress, let the president have a shot at it by wiping out things that are pork barrel or something of that nature. I've proposed another one. Some sophisticates think it may be a little gimmicky. I think it's good. It's a checkoff. It says to you as a taxpayer, say you're going to pay a tax of $1,000 or something. You can check 10% of that if you want to in one box, and that 10%, $100, or if you're paying $10,000, whatever it is, $1,000, check it off and make the government, make it lower the deficit by that amount. And if the Congress won't do it, if they can't get together and negotiate how to do that, then you'd have a sequester across the board. You'd exempt Social Security. I don't want to tax or touch Social Security. I'm the president that said, hey, don't mess with Social Security, and we haven't. So I believe we need to control the growth of mandatory spending. Back to this gentleman's question, that's the main growing thing in the budget. The program that the president, 2/3 of the budget, I as president, never get to look at, never get to touch. We've got to control that growth to inflation and population increase, but not raise taxes on the American people now. I just don't believe that would stimulate any kind of growth at all.
How about you, Mr. Perot?
Well, with $4 trillion in debt, we're going into debt an additional $1 billion, a little more than $1 billion every working day of the year. Now, the thing I love about it, I'm just a businessman. I was down in Texas taking care of business, tending to my family. This situation got so bad that I decided I better get into it. The American people asked me to get into it. But I just find it fascinating that while we sit here tonight, we will go into debt an additional $50 million in an hour and a half. Now, it's not the Republicans' fault, of course, and it's not the Democrats' fault, and what I'm looking for is who did it. Now, they're the two folks involved, so maybe if you put them together, they did it. Now, the facts are we have to fix it. We are leaving. I'm here tonight for these young people up here in the balcony from this college. When I was a young man, when I got out of the Navy, I had multiple job offers. Young people with high grades can't get a job. People, the 18 to 24-year-old high school graduates 10 years ago were making more than they are now. In other words, we were down to 18% of them were making, the 18 to 24-year-olds were making less than $12,000. Now that's up to 40%. And what's happened in the meantime? The dollar's gone through the floor. Now, whose fault is that? Not the Democrats, not the Republicans. Somewhere out there, there's an extraterrestrial that's doing this to us, I guess. And everybody says they take responsibility. Somebody somewhere has to take responsibility for this. Put it to you bluntly, American people. If you want me to be your president, we're going to face our problems. We'll deal with the problems. We'll solve our problems. We'll pay down our debt. We'll pass on the American dream to our children. And I will not leave our children a situation that they have today. When I was a boy, it took 2 generations to double the standard of living. Today, it will take 12 generations. Okay, our children will not see the American dream because of this debt that somebody somewhere dropped on us.
You're all wonderful speakers, and I know you have lots more to add, but I've talked to this audience, and they have lots of questions on other topics. Can we move to another topic, please? We have one up here, I think.
Yes, I'd like to address all the candidates with this question. The amount of time the candidates have spent in this campaign trashing their opponent's character and their programs is depressingly large. Why can't your discussions and proposals reflect the genuine complexity and the difficulty of the issues to try to build a consensus around the best aspects of all proposals?
Who wants to take that one? Mr. Perot, you have an answer for everything, don't you? Go right ahead, sir.
No, I don't have an answer for everything. But as you all know, I've been buying 30-minute segments to talk about issues. And tomorrow night on NBC from 10:30 to 11 Eastern, we're going to talk about how you pay the debt down. So we're going to come right down to that one. See, we'll be on again Saturday night, 8 to 9 o'clock on ABC. So,
okay, with top love.
Finally, I couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. And I have said again and again and again, let's get off mud wrestling, let's get off personalities, and let's talk about jobs, health care, crime, the things that concern the American people. I'm spending my money, not PAC money, not foreign money, my money, to take this message to the people.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. So that seems directed. He would say it's you gentlemen that have been doing that. Mr. Clinton, Governor Clinton, President Bush, how would you like to respond?
Well, first place, I believe that character is a part of being president. I think you have to look at it. I think that has to be a part of candidate for president or being president. In terms of programs, I've submitted, what, 4 different budgets to the United States Congress in great detail. They're so heavy they'd give you a, you know, broken back. And everything in there says what I am for. Now I've come out with a new agenda for America's renewal, a plan that I believe really will help stimulate the growth of this economy. My record on world affairs is pretty well known because I've been president for 4 years, so I feel I've been talking issues. You know, nobody likes who shot John, but I think the first negative campaign run in this election was by Governor Clinton. And I'm not going to sit there and be a punching bag. I'm going to stand up and say, hey, listen, here's my side of it. But character is an important part of the equation. The other night, Governor Clinton raised my, I don't know if you saw the debate the other night. Suffered through that. Well, he raised the question of my father. It was a good line, well rehearsed, and well delivered. But he raised the question of my father and said, well, your father, Prescott Bush, was against McCarthy. You should be ashamed of yourself, McCarthyism. I remember something my dad told me. I was 18-year-old, going to Penn Station to go on into the Navy. And he said, write your mother, which I faithfully did. He said, serve your country. My father was an honor, duty, and country man. And he said, tell the truth. And I've tried to do that in public life, all through it. And that says something about character. My argument with Governor Clinton, you can call it mud wrestling, but I think it's fair to put it in focus, is I am deeply troubled by someone who demonstrates and organizes demonstration in a foreign land when his country's at war. Probably a lot of kids here disagree with me, but that's what I feel. That's what I feel passionately about. I'm thinking of Ross Perot's running mate sitting in the jail. How would he feel about it? But maybe that's generational. I don't know. But the big argument I have with the governor on this is this taking different positions on different issues, trying to be one thing to one person here that's opposing the NAFTA agreement and then for it, what we call waffling. And I do think that you can't turn the White House into the Waffle House. You got to say what you're for, and you got to.
Mr. President, I'm getting time cues. With all due respect, I'm sorry.
No,
Governor
go ahead,
Clinton.
Carol. I get wound up because I feel.
Yes, you do.
Let me say first of all to you that I believe so strongly in the question you asked that I suggested this format tonight. I started doing these formats a year ago in New Hampshire. And I found that we had huge crowds because all I did was let people ask questions and I tried to give very specific answers. I also had a program starting last year. I've been disturbed by the tone and the tenor of this campaign. Thank goodness the networks have a fact check so I don't have to just go blue in the face anymore. Mr. Bush said once again tonight I was going to have a $150 billion tax increase. When Mr. Quayle said that, all the networks said that's not true. He's got over $100 billion of tax cuts and incentives. So I'm not going to take up your time tonight, but let me just say this. We'll have a debate in 4 days, and we can talk about this character thing again. But the Washington Post ran a long editorial today saying they couldn't believe Mr. Bush was making character an issue, and they said he was the greatest, quote, political chameleon for changing his positions of all time. Now, I don't want to get into that. Wait a minute. Let's don't, you don't have to believe that. Here's my point. I'm not interested in his character. I want to change the character of the presidency. And I'm interested in what we can trust him to do and what you can trust me to do and what you can trust Mr. Perot to do for the next 4 years. So I think you're right, and I hope the rest of the night belongs to you.
I talked to this audience before you gentlemen came, and I asked them about how they felt about the tenor of the campaign. Would you like to let them know what you thought about that when I said, are you pleased with how the campaign's been going? Who wants to say why you don't like the way the campaign is going? We have a gentleman back here.
If I may. And forgive the notes here, but I'm shy on camera. The focus of my work as a domestic mediator is meeting the needs of the children that I work with by way of their parents and not the wants of their parents. And I ask the three of you, how can we, as symbolically the children of the future president, expect the two of you, the three of you, to meet our needs, the needs in housing and crime and you name it, as opposed to the wants of your political spin doctors and your political parties.
So your question is?
Can we focus on the issues and not the personalities and the mud? I think there is a need, if we could take a poll here with the folks from Gallup perhaps, I think there is a real need here to focus at this point on the needs.
How do you respond? How do you gentlemen respond to...
I agree with him.
President Bush?
Let's do it. Let's talk about programs for children.
Could I ask one other thing?
Yeah.
Could we cross our hearts, and it sounds silly here, but could we make a commitment? You know, we're not under oath at this point, but could you make a commitment to the citizens of the United States to meet our needs? And we have many, and not yours. Again, I repeat that it's a real need, I think, that we all have.
I think it depends how you define it. I mean, I think in general, let's talk about these issues. Let's talk about the programs. But in the presidency, a lot goes into it. Caring goes into it. That's not particularly specific. Strength goes into it. That's not specific. Standing up against aggression, that's not specific in terms of a program. This is what a president has to do. So in principle, though, I'll take your point and think we ought to discuss child care or whatever else it is.
And you, too?
Go ahead. Ross had his hand up.
Just
yes, right.
No hedges, no ifs, ands, and buts. I'll take the pledge because I know the American people want to talk about issues and not tabloid journalism. So I'll take the pledge and we'll stay on the issues. Now, just for the record, I don't have any spin doctors. I don't have any speech writers. Probably shows. I make those charts you see on television even. That shows. Now, but you don't have to wonder if it's me talking. Say, what you see is what you get. If you don't like it, you got two other choices, right?
Oh, wait a minute. I want to say just one thing now, Ross, in fairness. The ideas I express are mine. I've worked on these things for 12 years, and I'm the only person up here who hasn't been part of Washington in any way for the last 20 years. So I don't want the implication to be that somehow everything we say just cooked up and put in our head by somebody else. I worked 12 years very hard as a governor on the real problems of real people. I'm just as sick as you are by having to wake up and figure out how to defend myself every day. I never thought I'd ever be involved in anything like this.
May I finish?
Yes, you may finish.
Very briefly?
Yes, very briefly.
And I don't have any foreign money in my campaign. I don't have any foreign lobbyists on leave in my campaign. I don't have any PAC money in my campaign. I got 5.5 million hardworking people who put me on the ballot, and I belong to them.
Okay.
And they are interested in what you're interested in. I take the pledge. I've already taken the pledge on cutting the deficit in half. I never got to say that. There's a great young group, Lead or Leave, college students, young people, who don't want us to spend their money. I took the pledge we'd cut it out.
Thank you. We have a question here.
Yes, I would like to get a response from all three gentlemen. And the question is, what are your plans to improve the physical infrastructure of this nation, which includes the water system, the sewer system, our transportation systems, etc.? Thank you.
The cities. Who's going to fix the cities and how?
Be glad to take a shot at it.
Please.
I'm not sure that, and I could understand if you haven't seen this, because there's been a lot of hue and cry. We passed this year the most farthest-looking transportation bill in the history of this country since Eisenhower started the interstate highways. $150 billion for improving the infrastructure. That happened when I was president, and so I'm very proud of the way that came about. And I think it's a very, very good beginning. Like Mr. Perot, I am concerned about the deficits. And $150 billion is a lot of money, but it's awful hard to say we're going to go out and spend more money when we're trying to get the deficit down. But I would cite that as a major accomplishment. We hear all the negatives. When you're president, you expect this. Everybody's running against the incumbent. They can do better. Everyone knows that. But here's something that we can take great pride in because it really does get to what you're talking about. Our home initiative, our home ownership initiative, HOPE, that passed the Congress, is a good start for having people own their own homes instead of living in these deadly tenements. Our enterprise zones that we hear a lot of lip service about in Congress would bring jobs into the inner city. There's a good program. And I need the help of everybody across this country to get it passed in substantial way by the Congress. When we went out to South Central in Los Angeles, some of you may remember the riots there. I went out there, I went to a boys club, and every one of them, the boys club leaders, The ministers, all of them were saying, pass enterprise zones. We go back to Washington, and very difficult to get it through the Congress, but there's going to be a new Congress. No one likes gridlock. There's going to be a new Congress, because the old one, I don't want to get this man mad at me, but there was a post office scandal and a bank scandal. You can have a lot of new members of Congress. And then you can sit down and say, help me do what we should for the cities, help me pass these programs.
Mr. President, aren't you threatening to veto the bill, the urban aid bill that included enterprise zones?
Sure, but the problem is you get so many things included in a great big bill that you have to look at the overall good. That's the problem with our system. If you had a line item veto, you could knock out the pork, you could knock out the tax increases, and you could do what the people want, and that is create enterprise zones.
Governor Clinton, you're chomping at the bit.
That bill pays for these urban enterprise zones by asking the wealthiest Americans to pay a little more, and that's why he wants to veto it. Just like he vetoed an earlier bill this year. This is not mudslinging, this is fact slinging. A bill earlier this year, this is facts, that would have given investment tax credits and other incentives to reinvest in our cities and our country, but it asked the wealthiest Americans to pay a little more. Mr. Perot wants to do the same thing. I agree with him. I mean, we agree with that. But let me tell you specifically what my plan does. My plan would dedicate $20 billion a year in each of the next 4 years for investments in new transportation, communications, environmental cleanups, and new technologies for the 21st century. And we would target it especially in areas that have been either depressed or which have lost a lot of defense-related jobs. There are 200,000 people in California, for example, who've lost their defense-related jobs. They ought to be engaged in making high-speed rail. They ought to be engaged in breaking ground in other technologies, doing waste recycling, clean water technology, and things of that kind. We can create millions of jobs in these new technologies, more than we're going to lose in defense if we target it. But we're investing a much smaller percentage of our income in the things you just asked about than all of our major competitors. And our wealth growth is going down as a result of it. It's making the country poorer, which is why I answered the gentleman the way I did before. We have to both bring down the deficit and get our economy going through these kinds of investments in order to get the kind of wealth and jobs and incomes we need in America.
Mr. Perot, what about your plans for the cities? You want to tackle the economy and the deficit first.
First, you got to have money to pay for these things. So you've got to create jobs. There are all kinds of ways to create jobs in the inner city. Now, I'm not a politician, but I think I could go to Washington in a week and get everybody holding hands and get this bill signed, because I talked to the Democratic leaders and they want it. I talked to Republican leaders and they want it. But since they are bred from childhood to fight with one another rather than get results, you know, I would be glad to drop out and spend a little time and see if we couldn't build some bridges. Now, results is what counts. The president can't order Congress around. Congress can't order the president around. That's not bad for a guy that's never been there, right? But you have to work together. Now, I have talked to the chairman of the committees that want this. They're Democrats. The president wants it, but we can't get it because we sit here in gridlock because it's a campaign year. We didn't fund a lot of other things this year, like the savings and loan mess. That's another story that we're going to pay a big price for right after the election. Right. The facts are, though, the facts are, the American people are hurting. These people are hurting in the inner cities. We're shipping the low-paying, quote, low-paying jobs overseas. What are low-paying jobs? Textiles, shoes, things like that we say are yesterday's industries. They're tomorrow's industries in the inner city. Let me say, in my case, if I'm out of work, I'll cut grass tomorrow to take care of my family. I'll be happy to make shoes. I'll be happy to make clothing. I'll make sausage. You just give me a job. Put those jobs in the inner cities instead of doing diplomatic deals and shipping them to China where prison labor does the work.
Mr. Perot, everybody thought you won the first debate because you were plain speaking and you made it sound oh so simple. We'll just do it. What makes you think that you're going to be able to get the Democrats and Republicans together any better than these guys?
If you ask me if I could fly a fighter plane or be an astronaut, I can't. I've spent my life creating jobs. It's something I know how to do. And very simply, in the inner city, they're starved. See, small businesses is the way to jumpstart the inner city.
Are you answering my question?
You want jobs in the inner city? Do you want jobs in the inner city? Is that your question?
No, I want you to tell me how you're going to be able to get the Republicans and Democrats in Congress to work together better than these two gentlemen.
I've listened to both sides, and if they would talk to one another instead of throwing rocks, I think we could get a lot done. And among other things, I would say, okay, over here in this Senate committee, to the chairman who is anxious to get this bill passed, to the president who's anxious, I'd say rather than just yelling at one another, why don't we find out where we're apart, try to get together, get the bill passed, and give the people the benefits and not play party politics right now. And I think the press would follow that so closely that probably they would get it done. That's the way I would do it. I doubt if they'll give me the chance, but I will drop everything and go work on it.
Okay, I have a question here.
My question was originally for Governor Clinton, but I think I would welcome a response from all three candidates. As you are aware, crime is rampant in our cities. And in the Richmond area, and I'm sure it's happened elsewhere, 12-year-olds are carrying guns to school. And I'm sure when our founding fathers wrote the Constitution, they did not mean for the right to bear arms to apply to 12-year-olds. So I'm asking, where do you stand on gun control, and what do you plan to do about it?
Governor Clinton.
I support the right to keep and bear arms. I live in a state where over half the adults have hunting or fishing licenses, or both. But I believe we have to have some way of checking handguns before they're sold, to check the criminal history, the mental health history, and the age of people who are buying them. Therefore, I support the Brady bill, which would impose a national waiting period unless and until a state did what only Virginia has done now, which is to automate its records. Once you automate your records, then you don't have to have a waiting period, but at least you can check. I also think we should have, frankly, restrictions on assault weapons whose only purpose is to kill. We need to give the police a fighting chance in our urban areas where the gangs are building up. The third thing I would say, it doesn't bear directly on gun control, but it's very important. We need more police on the street. There is a crime bill which would put more police on the street, which was killed for this session by a filibuster in the Senate, mostly by Republican senators. And I think it's a shame it didn't pass. I think it should be made the law, but it had the Brady bill in it, the waiting period. I also believe that we should offer college scholarships to people who will agree to work them off as police officers. And I think as we reduce our military forces, we should let people earn military retirement by coming out and working as police officers. 30 years ago, there were 3 police officers on the street for every crime. Today, there are 3 crimes for every police officer. In the communities which have had real success, putting police officers near schools where kids carry weapons to get the weapons out of the schools, or on the same blocks, you've seen crime go down. In Houston, there's been a 15% drop in the crime rate in the last year because of the work the mayor did there in increasing the police force. So I know it can work. I've seen it happen.
Thank you. President Bush?
I think you put your finger on a major problem. I talk about strengthening the American family, and it's very hard to strengthen the family if people are scared to walk down to the corner store and, you know, send their kid down to get a loaf of bread. It's very hard. I have been fighting for very strong anti-crime legislation. Habeas corpus reform, so you don't have these endless appeals. So when somebody gets sentenced, hey, this is for real. I've been fighting for changes in the exclusionary rules, so if an honest cop stops somebody and makes a technical mistake, the criminal doesn't go away. I'll probably get into a fight in this room with some, but I happen to think that we need stronger death penalties for those that kill police officers. Virginia's on the lead in this, as Governor Clinton properly said, on this identification system for firearms. I am not for national registration of firearms. Some of the states that have the toughest anti-gun laws have the highest levels of crime. I am for the right, as the governor says. I'm a sportsman, and I don't think you ought to eliminate all kinds of weapons. But I was not for the bill that he was talking about because it was not tough enough on the criminal. I'm very pleased that the Fraternal Order of Police in Little Rock, Arkansas endorsed me because I think they see I'm trying to strengthen the anti-crime legislation. We've got more money going out for local police than any previous administration. So we've got to get it under control. And there's one last point I'd make. Drugs. We have got to win our national strategy against drugs, the fight against drugs. And we're making some progress. We're doing a little better on interdiction. We're not doing as well amongst the the people that get to be habitual drug users. The good news is, and I think it's true in Richmond, teenage use is down of cocaine substantially, 60% in the last couple of years. So we're making progress, but until we get that one done, we're not going to solve the neighborhood crime problem.
Mr. Perot, there are young black males in America dying at unprecedented
I didn't get to make
rates.
a comment on this.
Yes, I'm getting
you're
to
going
that
to
point.
elaborate.
The
Okay,
fact
excuse me.
that homicide is the leading cause of death among young black males 15 to 24 years of old. What are you going to do to get the guns off the street?
On any program, and this includes crime, you'll find we have all kinds of great plans lying around that never get enacted into law and implemented. I don't care what it is. Competitiveness, health care, crime, you name it. Brady bill, I agree with that it's a timid step in the right direction, but it won't fix it. So why pass a law that won't fix it? Now, what it really boils down to is, can you live? We have become so preoccupied with the rights of the criminal that we've forgotten the rights of the innocent. And in our country, we have evolved to a point where we've put millions of innocent people in jail because you go to the poor neighborhoods and they put bars on their windows and bars on their doors and put themselves in jail to protect the things that they acquired legitimately. Now, that's where we are. We have got to become more concerned about people who play by the rules and get the balance we require. This is going to take, first, building a consensus in grassroots America. Right from the bottom up, the American people have got to say they want it. And at that point, we can pick from a variety of plans and develop new plans, and the way you get things done is bury yourselves in the room with one another, put together the best program, take it to the American people, use the electronic town hall, the kind of thing you're doing here tonight, build the consensus, and then do it, and then go on to the next one. But don't just sit here slow dancing for 4 years doing nothing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Perot. We have a question up here.
Please state your position on term limits, and if you are in favor of them, how will you get them enacted?
Any order? I'd be glad to respond.
Thank you.
I strongly support term limits for members of the United States Congress. I believe it would return the government closer to the people in the way that Ross Perot is talking about. The president's terms are limited to 2, total of 8 years. What's wrong with limiting the terms of members of Congress to 12? Congress has gotten kind of institutionalized. For 38 years, one party has controlled the House of Representatives, and the result, sorry little post office that can't do anything right, and a bank that has more overdrafts than all the Chase Bank and Citibank put together. We've got to do something about it, and I think you get a certain arrogance, bureaucratic arrogance, if people stay there too long. And so I strongly favor term limits. And how to get them passed? Send us some people that'll pass the idea. And I think you will. I think the American people want it now. Every place I go, I talk about it, and I think they want it done. Actually, you'd have to have some amendments to the Constitution because of the way the Constitution reads.
Thank you. Governor Clinton.
I know they're popular, but I'm against them. I'll tell you why. I believe, number one, it would pose a real problem for a lot of smaller states in the Congress. It would have enough trouble now making sure their interests are heard. Number two, I think it would increase the influence of unelected staff members in the Congress who have too much influence already. I want to cut the size of the congressional staffs, but I think you're going to have too much influence there with people who were never elected who have lots of expertise. Number three, if the people really have a mind to change, they can. You're going to have 120 to 150 new members of Congress. Now, let me tell you what I favor instead. I favor strict controls on how much you can spend running for Congress, strict limits on political action committees, requirements that people running for Congress appear in open public debates like we're doing now. If you did that, you could take away the incumbent's advantage because challengers like me would have a chance to run against incumbents like him for House races and Senate races, and then the voters could make up their own mind without being subject to an unfair fight. So that's how I feel about it, and I think if we had the right kind of campaign reform, we'd get the changes you want.
Mr. Perot, would you like to address term limitations?
Yes. Let me do it first on a personal level. If the American people send me up to do this job, I intend to be there one term. I do not intend to spend 1 minute of one day thinking about re-election. And as a matter of principle, and my situation is unique and I understand it, I would take absolutely no compensation. I go as their servant. Now, I have set as strong an example as I can. Then at that point, when we sit down over at Capitol Hill, tomorrow night I'm going to be talking about government reform. It's a long subject. You wouldn't let me finish tonight. If you want to hear it, you get it tomorrow night. But the point is, sorry, just a little silly. And if you're here tomorrow night. But we have got to reform government. If you put term limits in and don't reform government, you won't get the benefits you thought. It takes both. So we need to do the reforms and the term limits, and after we reform it, it won't be a lifetime career opportunity. Good people will go serve and then go back to their homes and not become foreign lobbyists and cash in at $30,000 a month and then take time off to run some president's campaign. They're all nice people, they're just in a bad system. I don't think they're any villains, but boy, is the system rotten.
Thank you very much. We have a question over here.
I'd like to ask Governor Clinton, do you attribute the rising costs of health care to the medical profession itself, or do you think the problem lies elsewhere? And what specific proposals do you have to tackle this problem?
I've had more people talk to me about their health care problems, I guess, than anything else. All across America, you know, people who've lost their jobs, lost their businesses, had to give up their jobs because of sick children. And so let me try to answer you in this way. Let's start with a premise. We spend 30% more of our income than any nation on earth on health care, and yet we insure fewer people. We have 35 million people without any insurance at all, and I see them all the time. 100,000 Americans a month have lost their health insurance just in the last 4 years. So if you analyze where we're out of line with other countries, you come up with the following conclusions. Number one, we spend at least $60 billion a year on insurance, administrative costs, bureaucracy, and government regulation that wouldn't be spent in any other nation. So we have to have, in my judgment, a drastic simplification of the basic health insurance policies of this country. Be very comprehensive for everybody. Employers would cover their employees, government would cover the unemployed. Number two, I think you have to take on specifically the insurance companies and require them to make some significant change in the way they rate people into big community pools. I think you have to tell the pharmaceutical companies they can't keep raising drug prices at 3 times the rate of inflation. I think you have to take on medical fraud. I think you have to help doctors stop practicing defensive medicine. I've recommended that our doctors be given a set of national practice guidelines, and that if they follow those guidelines, that raises the presumption that they didn't do anything wrong. I think you have to have a system of primary and preventive clinics in our inner cities and our rural areas so people can have access to health care. But the key is to control the cost and maintain the quality. To do that, you need a system of managed competition where all of us are covered in big groups and we can choose our doctors and our hospitals across a wide range, but there is an incentive to control costs. And I think there has to be, I think Mr. Perot and I agree on this, there has to be a national commission of healthcare providers and healthcare consumers that sets ceilings to keep health costs in line with inflation plus population growth. Now let me say, some people say we can't do this, but Hawaii does it. They cover 98% of their people, and their insurance premiums are much cheaper than the rest of America, and so does Rochester, New York. They now have a plan to cover everybody, and their premiums are 2/3 the rest of the country. This is very important. It's a big human problem and a devastating economic problem for America, and I'm going to send a plan to do this within the first 100 days of my presidency. It's terribly important.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you short, but President Bush, health care reform.
I just have to say something. I don't want to stampede. Ross was very articulate across the country. I don't want anybody to stampede to cut the president's salary off altogether. Barbara's sitting over here, and but what I have proposed, 10% cut, downsize the government, and we can get that done. She asked the question, I think, is whether the health care profession was to blame. No. One thing to blame is these malpractice lawsuits. They are breaking the system. It costs $20 to $25 billion a year, and I want to see those outrageous claims capped. Doctors don't dare to deliver babies sometimes because they're afraid that somebody's going to sue them. People don't dare, medical practitioners, to help somebody along the highway that are hurt because they're afraid that some lawyer's going to come along and get a big lawsuit. So you can't blame the practitioners or the health profit. And my program is this: keep the government as far out of it as possible, make insurance available to the poorest of the poor through vouchers, next range in the income bracket through tax credits, and get on about the business of pooling insurance. A great big company can buy, Ross got a good-sized company, been very successful. He can buy insurance cheaper than mom and pop store on the corner. But if those mom and pop stores all get together and pool, they too can bring the cost of insurance down. So I want to keep the quality of health care. That means keep government out of it. I want to do better. I don't like this idea of these boards. It all sounds to me like you're going to have some government setting price. I want competition, and I want to pool the insurance and take care of it that way. And here's the other point. I think medical care should go with the person. If you leave a business, I think your insurance should go with you to some other business. You shouldn't be worrying if you get a new job as to whether that's going to, and part of our plan is to make it what they call portable, big word, but that means if you're working for the Jones Company, you go to the Smith Company, your insurance goes with you. I think it's a good program. I'm really excited about getting it done, too.
Mr. Perot.
We have the most expensive health care system in the world. 12% of our gross national product goes to health care. Our industrial competitors who are beating us in competition spend less and have better health care. Japan spends a little over 6% of its gross national product. Germany spends 8%. It's fascinating. You brought a front row box seat and you're not happy with your health care. And you're saying tonight we've got bad health care but very expensive health care. Folks, here's why. Go home and look in the mirror. You own this country, but you have no voice in it the way it's organized now. And if you want to have a high-risk experience comparable to bungee jumping, go into Congress sometime when they're working on this kind of legislation, when the lobbyists are running up and down the halls. Wear your safety-toe shoes when you go. And as a private citizen, believe me, you are looked on as a major nuisance. The facts are you now have a government that comes at you. You're supposed to have a government that comes from you. Now, there are all kinds of good ideas, brilliant ideas, terrific ideas on health care. None of them ever get implemented because, let me give you an example. Senator runs every 6 years. He's got to raise $20,000 a week to have enough money to run. Who's he got to listen to, us or the folks running up and down the aisles with money, the lobbyists, the PAC money? He listens to them. Who do they represent? Healthcare industry, not us. Now, you've got to have a government that comes from you again. You've got to reassert your ownership in this country, and you've got to completely reform our government. And at that point, they'll just be like apples falling out of a tree. The programs will be good because the elected officials will be listening to you. I said the other night I was all ears, and I would listen to any good idea. I think we ought to do plastic surgery on a lot of these guys so that they're all ears too and listen to you. Then you get what you want, and shouldn't you? You paid for it. Why shouldn't you get what you want as opposed to what some lobbyist cuts a deal, writes the little piece in the law, and it goes through. That's the way the game's played now. Till you change it, you're going to be unhappy.
Thank you. Governor Clinton, you wanted one brief point in there.
One brief point. We have elections so people can make decisions about this. The point I want to make to you is a bipartisan commission reviewed my plan and the Bush plan and concluded there were many Republicans as Democratic health care experts on it. They concluded that my plan would cover everybody and his would leave 27 million behind by the year 2000. And that my plan in the next 12 years would save $2.2 trillion in public and private money to reinvest in this economy. And the average family would save $1,200 a year under the plan that I offered without any erosion in the quality of health care. So I ask you to look at that. And you have to vote for somebody with the plan. That's what you have elections for. If people say, well, he got elected to do this, then the Congress says, okay, I'm going to do it. That's what the election was about.
Brief, Governor Clinton. Thank you. We have a question right here.
Yes. How has the national debt personally affected each of your lives? And if it hasn't, how can you honestly find a cure for the economic problems of the common people if you have no experience in what's ailing them?
May I answer?
Well, Mr.
Who do you want to start with?
Of course.
Who?
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
For each of you.
Yes.
So we can
It
start
caused
with
me to disrupt my private life and my business to get involved in this activity. That's how much I care about it. And believe me, if you knew my family and if you knew the private life I have, you would agree in a minute that that's a whole lot more fun than getting involved in politics. But I have lived the American dream. I came from a very modest background. Nobody's been luckier than I've been. All the way across the spectrum, and the greatest riches of all are my wife and children. It's true of any family. But I want all the children. I want these young people up here to be able to start with nothing but an idea like I did and build a business. But they've got to have a strong basic economy. And if you're in debt, it's like having a ball and chain around you. I just figure, as lucky as I've been, I owe it to them. And I owe it to the future generations. And on a very personal basis, I owe it to my children and grandchildren.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. Mr. President.
Well, I think the national debt affects everybody. Obviously, it has a lot to do with interest rates. It has.
She's saying you personally.
On a personal basis, how has it affected you?
Has it affected you personally?
Well, I'm sure it has. I love my grandchildren. I want to think
How?
that I want to think that they're going to be able to afford an education. I think that that's an important part of being a parent. Maybe I won't get it wrong. Are you suggesting that if somebody has means, that the national debt doesn't affect them?
Oh, what I'm saying
I'm not sure I get it. Help me with the question, and I'll try to answer it.
I've had friends that have been laid off from jobs.
Yeah.
I know people who cannot afford to pay the mortgage on their homes, their car payment. I have personal problems with the national debt, but how has it affected you? And if you have no experience in it, how can you help us if you don't know what we're feeling?
I think she means more the recession, the economic problems today the country faces, rather than the deficit.
You ought to be in the White House for a day and hear what I hear and see what I see and read the mail I read and touch the people that I touch from time to time. I was in the Lomax AME Church. It's a black church just outside of Washington, D.C. And I read in the bulletin about teenage pregnancies, about the difficulty that families are having to make ends meet. I talk to parents. I mean, you got to care. Everybody cares if people aren't doing well. But I don't think it's fair to say, you haven't had cancer, therefore you don't know what it's like. I don't think it's fair to say, whatever it is, that if you haven't been hit by it personally, but everybody's affected by the debt. Because of the tremendous interest that goes into paying on that debt, everything's more expensive. Everything comes out of your pocket and my pocket. So it's that. But I think in terms of the recession, of course you feel it when you're president of the United States. And that's why I'm trying to do something about it by stimulating the export, investing more, better education systems. Thank you. I'm glad to clarify.
Tell me how it's affected you again. You know people who lost their jobs and lost their homes? Well, I've been governor of a small state for 12 years. I'll tell you how it's affected me. Every year, Congress and the President sign laws that make us do more things and gives us less money to do it with. I see people in my state, middle-class people, their taxes have gone up in Washington and their services have gone down, while the wealthy have gotten tax cuts. I have seen what's happened in this last 4 years when, in my state, when people lose their jobs, there's a good chance I'll know them by their names. When a factory closes, I know the people who ran it. When the businesses go bankrupt, I know them. And I've been out here for 13 months, meeting in meetings just like this ever since October, with people like you all over America, people that have lost their jobs, lost their livelihood, lost their health insurance. What I want you to understand is the national debt is not the only cause of that. It is because America has not invested in its people. It is because we have not grown. It is because we've had 12 years of trickle-down economics. We've gone from 1st to 12th in the world in wages. We've had 4 years where we produced no private sector jobs. Most people are working harder for less money than they were making 10 years ago. It is because we are in the grip of a failed economic theory. And this decision you're about to make better be about what kind of economic theory you want. Not just people saying, I'm going to go fix it, but what are we going to do? What I think we have to do is invest in American jobs, American education, control American health care costs, and bring the American people together again.
Thank you, Governor Clinton. We are a little more than halfway through this program, and I'm glad that we're getting the diversity of questions that we are. And I don't want to forget these folks on the wings over here, so let's go over here. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. My name is Ben Smith. I work in the financial field counseling retirees, and I'm personally concerned about three major areas. One is the Social Security Administration, or trust fund, is projected to be insolvent by the year 2036. And we funded the trust fund with IOUs in the form of treasury bonds. The Pension Guarantee Fund, which backs up our private retirement plans for retirees, is projected to be bankrupt by the year 2026 not to mention the cutbacks by private companies. And Medicare is projected to be bankrupt maybe as soon as 1997. And I would like from each of you a specific response as to what you intend to do for retirees relative to these issues, not generalities but specifics, because I think they're very disturbing issues.
President Bush, may we start with you?
Well, the Social Security, you're an expert, and I could, I'm sure, learn from you the details of the Pension Guarantee Fund and the Social Security Fund. The Social Security system was fixed about 5 years, and I think it's projected out to be sound beyond that. So at least we have time to work with it. But on all of these things, a sound economy is the only way to get it going. Growth in the economy is going to add to the overall prosperity and wealth. I can't give you a specific answer on Pension Guarantee Fund. All I know is that we have firm government credit to guarantee the pensions, and that is very important. But it's the full faith and credit of the United States in spite of our difficulties is still pretty good. It's still the most respected credit. So I would simply say, as these dates get close, you're going to have to reorganize and refix, as we did with the Social Security Fund. And I think that's the only answer. But the more immediate answer is to do what this lady was suggesting we do, and that is to get this deficit down and get on without adding to the woes and then restructure. One thing I've called for that has been stymied, and I'll keep on working for it, is a whole financial reform legislation. It is absolutely essential in terms of bringing our banking system and credit system into the new age instead of having it living back in the dark ages. And it's a big fight, and I don't want to give my friend Ross another shot at me here, but I am fighting with the Congress to get this through. And you can't just go up and say, I'm going to fix it. You got some pretty strong-willed guys up there that argue with you. But that's what the election's about. I agree with the governor. That's what the election is about. And sound fiscal policy is the best answer, I think, to all the three problems you mentioned.
Thank you. Mr. Perot?
Just on the broad issue here, when you're trying to solve a problem, you get the best plans. You have a raging debate about those plans. Then, out of that debate with leadership comes consensus. Then, if the plans are huge and complex like health care, I would urge you to implement pilot programs. Like the old carpenter says, measure twice, cut once. You know, let's make sure this thing's as good as we all think it is at the end of the meeting. Then finally, our government passes laws and freezes the plan in concrete. Anybody that's ever built a successful business will tell you, you optimize, optimize, optimize after you put something into effect. The reason Medicare and Medicaid are a mess is we froze them. Everybody knows how to fix them. There are people all over the federal government, if they could just touch it with a screwdriver, could fix it. Now back over here. See, we've got a $4 trillion debt, and only in America would you have $2.8 trillion of it, or 70% of it, financed 5 years or less. Now that's another thing for you to think about when you go home tonight. You don't finance long-term debt with short-term money. Why did our government do it? To get the interest rates down. A 1% increase in interest rates in that $2.8 trillion is $28 billion a year. Now, when you look at what Germany pays for money and what we don't pay for money, you realize there's quite a spread, right? And you realize this is a temporary thing, and there's going to be another sucking sound that runs our deficit through the roof. You know, and everybody's ducking it, so I'm going to say it, that we are not letting that surplus stay in the bank. We are not investing that surplus like a pension fund. We are spending that surplus to make the deficit look smaller to you than it really is. Now that puts you in jail in corporate America if you kept books that way, but in government it's just kind of the way things are. That's because it comes at you, not from you. Now then, that money needs to be, they don't even pay interest on it. They just write a note for the interest.
Mr. Perot, can you wrap it up?
But the point, see, do you want to fix the problem or soundbite it? I understand the importance of time, but see, here's how we get to this mess we're in. This is just one of 1,000. Fair. Now then, to nail it, there's one way out. A growing, expanding job base. A growing, expanding job base to generate the funds and the tax revenues to pay off the mess and rebuild America. We got a double hit. If we're $4 trillion down, we should have everything perfect, but we don't. We got to pay it off and build money to renew it. Spend money to renew it, and that's going to take a growing, expanding job base. That is priority one in this country. Put everybody that's breathing to work. And I'd love to be out of workers and have to import them like some of our international
Mr. Perot,
competitors.
I'm sorry, I'm going
Sorry.
to... And I don't want to soundbite you, but we are trying to be fair
Okay.
to everyone.
No, absolutely, I apologize.
All right, Governor Clinton.
I think I remember the question. Let me say, first of all, I want to answer your specific question, but first of all, we all agree that there should be a growing economy. What you have to decide is who's got the best economic plan. And we all have ideas out there, and Mr. Bush has a record. So I don't want you to read my lips, and I sure don't want you to read his. I do hope you will read our plans. Now, specifically, one, on Medicare, it is not true that everyone knows how to fix it. There are different ideas. The Bush plan, the Perot plan, the Clinton, we have different ideas. I am convinced, having studied health care for a year hard and talking to hundreds and hundreds of people all across America, that you cannot control the cost of Medicare until you control the cost of private health care and public health care with managed competition, ceiling on cost, and radical reorganization of the insurance markets. You've got to do that. We've got to get those costs down. Number two, with regard to Social Security, that program, a lot of you may not know this, it produces a $70 billion surplus a year. Social Security is in surplus, $70 billion. 6 increases in the payroll tax. That means people with incomes of $51,000 a year or less pay a disproportionately high share of the federal tax burden, which is why I want some middle-class tax relief. What do we have to do? By the time the century turns, we have got to have our deficit under control. We have to work out of so that surplus is building up so when the baby boomers like me retire, we're okay. Number three, on the pension funds, I don't know as much about it, but I will say this. What I would do is to bring in the pension experts of the country, take a look at it, and strengthen the pension requirements further, because it's not just enough to have the guarantee. We had a guarantee on the S&Ls, right? We had a guarantee, and what happened? You picked up a $500 billion bill because of the dumb way the federal government deregulated it. So I think we are going to have to change and strengthen the pension requirements on private retirement plans.
Thank you. I think we have a question here on international affairs, hopefully.
We've come to a position where we're in a new world order, and I'd like to know what the candidates feel our position is in this new world order and what our responsibilities are as a superpower.
Mr. President?
Well, we have come to that position. Since I became president, 43, 44 countries have gone democratic. No longer totalitarian, no longer living under dictatorship or communist rule. This is exciting. This is New World Order to me means freedom and democracy. I think we will have a continuing responsibility as the only remaining superpower to stay involved. If we pull back in some isolation and say we don't have to do our share or more than our share anymore, I believe you're going to just ask for conflagration that we'll get involved in the future. NATO, for example, has kept the peace for many, many years, and I want to see us keep fully staffed in NATO, so we'll continue to guarantee the peace in Europe. But the exciting thing is the fear of nuclear war is down, and you hear all the bad stuff that's happened on my watch. I hope people will recognize that this is something pretty good for mankind. I hope they'll think it's good that democracy and freedom is on the move. And we're going to stay engaged, as long as I'm president, working to improve things. You know, it's so easy now to say, hey, cut out foreign aid, we got a problem at home. I think the United States has to still have the Statue of Liberty as a symbol of caring for others. We're right this very minute, we're sending supplies in to help these little starving kids in Somalia. We're trying to get, it's the United States that's taken the lead in humanitarian aid into Bosnia. We're doing this all around the world. And yes, we got problems at home. And I think I got a good plan to help fix those problems at home. But because of our leadership, because we didn't listen to the nuclear freeze group, do you remember? Freeze it back in about the late 70s. Freeze, don't touch it. We're going to lock it in now or else we'll have war. President Reagan said, no, peace through strength. It worked. The Soviet Union is no more, and now we're working to help them become totally democratic through the Freedom Support Act that I led on. A great Democratic ambassador, Bob Strauss over there, Jim Baker, all of us got this thing passed through cooperation, Ross. It worked with cooperation, and you're for that, I'm sure, helping Russia become democratic. So the New World Order to me means freedom and democracy, keep engaged, do not pull back into isolation, and we are the United States, and we have a responsibility to lead and to guarantee the security. If it hadn't been for us, Saddam Hussein would be sitting on top of 3/5 of the oil supply of the world, and he'd have nuclear weapons. And only the United States could do that. Excuse me, Carol.
Thank you. Mr. Perot.
Well, it's cost-effective to help Russia succeed in its revolution. It's pennies on the dollar compared to going back to the Cold War. Russia's still very unstable. They could go back to square one and worse. There's still, all the nuclear weapons are not dismantled. I'm particularly concerned about the intercontinental weapons, the ones that can hit us. We've got agreements, but they're still there. With all this instability and breaking into republics, and all the Middle Eastern countries going over there and shopping for weapons, we've got our work cut out for us. So we need to stay right on top of that and constructively help them move toward democracy and capitalism. We have to have money to do that. We have to have our people at work. See, for 45 years we were preoccupied with the Red Army. I suggest now that our #1 preoccupation is red ink in our country. And we've got to put our people back to work so that we can afford to do these things we want to do in Russia. We cannot be the policeman for the world any longer. We spend $300 billion a year defending the world. Germany and Japan spend around $30 billion apiece. It's neat. If I can get you to defend me and I can spend all my money building industry, that's a home run for me. Coming out of World War II, it made sense. Now, the other superpowers need to do their part. I'll close on this point. You can't be a superpower unless you're an economic superpower. If we're not an economic superpower, we're used to be, and we will no longer be a force for good throughout the world. And if nothing else gets you excited about rebuilding our industrial base, maybe that will, because it's job one is to put our people back to work.
Governor Clinton, the president mentioned Saddam Hussein. You're vice president, and you have had some words about the president and Saddam Hussein. Would you care to comment?
I'd rather answer her question first, and I'll be glad to, because the question you ask is important. The end of the Cold War brings an incredible opportunity for change. Winds of freedom blowing around the world, Russia demilitarizing. And it also requires us to maintain some continuity, some bipartisan American commitment to certain principles. And I would just say there are three things that I would like to say. Number one, we do have to maintain the world's strongest defense. We may differ about what the elements of that are. I think the defense needs to be with fewer people in permanent armed services, but with greater mobility on the land, in the air, and on the sea, with a real dedication to continuing development of high-technology weaponry and well-trained people. I think we're going to have to work to stop the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. We've got to keep going until all those nuclear weapons in Russia are gone and the other republics. Number two, if you don't rebuild the economic strength of this country at home, we won't be a superpower. We can't have any more instances like what happened when Mr. Bush went to Japan and the Japanese Prime Minister said he felt sympathy for our country. We have to be the strongest economic power in the world. That's what got me into this race, so we could rebuild the American economy. And number three, we need to be a force for freedom and democracy, and we need to use our unique position to support freedom, whether it's in Haiti or in China or in any other place. Wherever the seeds of freedom are sprouting, we can't impose it, but we need to nourish it. And that's the kind of thing that I would do as president, follow those three commitments into the future.
Okay, we have a question up there.
Yes, we've talked a lot tonight about creating jobs, but we have an awful lot of high school graduates who don't know how to read a ruler, who cannot fill out an application for a job. How can we create high-paying jobs with the education system we have, and what would you do to change it? Thank you.
Who would like to begin? The education president?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'd be delighted to, because you can't do it the old way. You can't do it with the school bureaucracy controlling everything, and that's why we have a new program that I hope people have heard about. It's being worked now in 1,700 communities. Bypass Congress on this one, Ross. 1,700 communities across the country. It's called America 2000. And it literally says to the communities, reinvent the schools. Not just the bricks and mortar, but the curriculum and everything else. Think anew. We have a concept called the New American School Corporation, where we're doing exactly that. And so I believe that we got to get the power in the hands of the teachers, not the teachers' union. What's happening up there? And so our America 2000 program also says this. It says, let's give parents the choice of a public, private, or public school. Public, private, or religious school. And it works. It works in Milwaukee. Democratic woman up there taking the lead in this, the mayor up there on the program, and the schools that are not chosen are improved. Competition does that. So we've got to innovate through school choice. We've got to innovate through this America 2000 program. But she is absolutely right. The programs that we've been trying where you control everything and mandate it from Washington don't work. The governors, and I believe Governor Clinton was in on this, but maybe I don't want to invoke him here, but they come to me and they say, please get the Congress to stop passing so many mandates telling us how to control things. We know better how to do it in California or Texas or wherever it is. So this is what our program is all about, and I believe you're right on to something, that if we don't change the education, we're not going to be able to compete. Federal funding for education is up substantially. Pell Grants are up, but it isn't going to get the job done if we don't change K through 12.
Governor Clinton?
First of all, let me say that I've spent more of my time in life on this in the last 12 years than any other issue. 70% of my state's money goes to public schools, and I was really honored when Time magazine said that our schools had shown more improvement than any other state in the country except one other. They named 2 states showing real strides forward in the 80s. So I care a lot about this, and I spent countless hours in schools. But let me start with what you said. I agree with some of what Mr. Bush said, but it's nowhere near enough. We live in a world where what you earn depends on what you can learn, where the average 18-year-old will change jobs 8 times in a lifetime, and where none of us can promise any of you that what you now do for a living is absolutely safe from now on. Nobody running can promise that. There's too much change in the world. So what should we do? Let me reel some things off real quick, because you said you wanted specifics. Number one, under my program, we would provide matching funds to states to teach everybody with a job to read in the next 5 years and give everybody with a job the chance to get a high school diploma in big places on the job. Number two, we would provide 2-year apprenticeship programs to high school graduates who don't go to college, and community colleges are on the job. Number three, we'd open the doors to college education to high school graduates without regard to income. They could borrow the money and pay it back as a percentage of their income or with a couple of years of service to our nation here at home. Number four, we would fully fund the Head Start program to get little kids off to a good start. And 5, I would have an aggressive program of school reform. More choices, I favor public schools or these new charter schools. We can talk about that if you want. I don't think we should spend tax money on private schools, but I favor public school choice, and I favor radical decentralization and giving more power to better trained principals and teachers with parent councils to control their schools. Those things would revolutionize American education and take us to the top economically.
Thank you, Governor Clinton. The question is, what is it going to cost? What is it going to cost?
In 6 years, I budget all this in my budget. In 6 years, the college program would cost $8 billion over and above what the present student loan program costs $4 billion. You pay $3 billion for busted loans because we don't have an automatic recovery system, and $1 billion in bank fees. So the net cost will be $8 billion 6 years from now in a $1 trillion+ budget, not very much. The other stuff, all the other stuff I mentioned, costs much less than that. The Head Start program full funding would cost about $5 billion more. And it's all covered in my budget from the plans that I've laid out, from raising taxes on families with incomes above $200,000 and asking foreign corporations to pay the same tax that American corporations do on the same income, from $140 billion in budget cuts, including what I think are very prudent cuts in the defense budget. It's all covered.
Mr. Perot, you on education, please.
Yes, I've got scars to show for being around education reform. And the first word you need to say in every city and state, and just draw a line in the sand, is public schools exist for the benefit of the children. You're going to see a lot of people fall over. Because anytime you're spending $199 billion a year, somebody's getting it. And the children get lost in the process. So that's step one. Keep in mind, in 1960, when our schools were the envy of the world, we were spending $16 billion on them. Now we spend more than any other nation in the world $199 billion a year and rank at the bottom of the industrialized world in terms of education achievement. One more time, you brought a front row box seat and got a third-rate performance. It's a government that's not serving you. By and large, it should be local. The more local, the better. Interesting phenomenon. Small towns have good schools, big cities have terrible schools. The best people in a small town will serve on the school board. You get into big cities, it's political patronage, stepping stones. You get the job, give your relatives the janitor's jobs at $57,000 a year, more than the teachers make, and with luck they clean the cafeteria once a week. Now, you're paying for that. Those schools belong to you. And we put up with that. And as long as you put up with that, that's what you're going to get. And these folks are just dividing up $199 billion and the children get lost. If I could wish for one thing for great public schools, it'd be a strong family unit in every home. Nothing will ever replace that. You say, well, gee, what are you going to do about that? Well, the White House is a bully pulpit, and I think we ought to be pounding on the table every day. There's nothing, the most efficient unit of government the world will ever know is a strong, loving family unit. Next thing, you need small schools, not big schools. A little school, everybody's somebody. Individualism is very important. These big factories, everybody told me they were cost effective. I did a study on it, they're cost ineffective. 5,000 students, why is a high school that big? One reason. Sooner or later, we get 11 or more boys that can run like the devil, that weigh 250 pounds, and they might win district. Now, that has nothing to do with learning. Secondly, across Texas, typically half the school day was non-academic pursuits. In one place, it was 35%. In Texas, you could have unlimited absences to go to livestock shows. Found a boy, excuse me, but this gives the flavor. Boy in Houston kept a chicken in the bathtub in downtown Houston. Missed 65 days going to livestock shows. Finally had to come back in school. The chicken lost his feathers. That's the only way we got him back. Now, that's your tax money being wasted. Now, neighborhood schools. It is terrible to bus tiny little children across town. And it is particularly terrible to take poor, tiny little children and wait until the first grade and bus them across town to Mars, where the children know their numbers, know their letters, have had every advantage at the end of the first day that little child wants out. I'll close on this. We've got to have world-class teachers, world-class books. If you ever got close to how textbooks were selected, you wouldn't want to go back the second day. I don't have time to tell you the stories.
No, you don't.
Finally. But if we don't fix this, you're right, we can't have the industries of tomorrow unless we have the best educated workforce. And here you've got, for the disadvantaged children, you've got to have early childhood development, cheapest money you'll ever spend. First contact should be with the mother when she's pregnant. That little child needs to be loved and hugged and nurtured and made to feel special, like your children were. They learn to think well or poorly of themselves in the first 18 months.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
within the
Perot.
first few years, they either learn how to learn or don't learn how to learn. And if they don't, they wind up in prison.
Thank
and it
you,
costs more to
Mr.
keep them in
Perot.
prison than it does to send them to Harvard. I rest my case.
Thank you. President Bush, you wanted to add something.
I just had a word of clarification because of something Governor Clinton said. My school choice program, GI Bill for Kids, does not take public money and give it to private schools. It does what the GI Bill itself did when I came out of World War II. It takes public money and gives it to families or individuals to choose the school they want. And where it's been done, those schools, like in Rochester, those schools that weren't chosen, find that they then compete and do better. So I think it's worth a shot. We've got a pilot program. It ought to be tried. School choice, public, private, or religious, not to the schools, but to, 46% of the teachers in Chicago, public school teachers, send their kids to private school. Now, I think we ought to try to help families and see if it will do what I think, make all schools better.
I just want to mention, if I could, just two
Very
other things.
briefly.
Very briefly. Involving the parents in the preschool education of their kids, even if they're poor and uneducated, can make a huge difference. We have a big program in my state that teaches mothers or fathers to teach their kids to get ready for school. It's the most successful thing we've ever done. Just a fact clarification real quickly. We do not spend a higher percentage of our income on public education than every other country. There are 9 countries that spend more than we do on public education. We spend more on education because we spend so much more on colleges. But if you look at public education alone and you take into account the fact that we have more racial diversity and more poverty, it makes a big difference. There are great public schools where there's public school choice, accountability, and brilliant principals. I'll just mention one, the Beasley Academic Center in Chicago. I commend it to anybody. It's as good as any private school in the country.
We have very little time left, and it occurs to me that we have talked all this time, and there has not been one question about some of the racial tensions and ethnic tensions in America. Is there anyone in this audience that would like to pose a question to the candidates on this? Yes.
What I'd like to know, and this is to any of the three of you, is aside from the recent accomplishments of your party, aside from those accomplishments in racial representation, and without citing any of your current appointments or successful elections, when do you estimate your party will both nominate and elect an Afro-American and female ticket to the presidency of the United States?
Governor Clinton, why don't you answer that first?
Well, I don't have any idea, but I hope it will happen sometime in my lifetime.
I do too.
I believe that this country is electing more and more African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans who are representing districts that are themselves not necessarily of a majority of their race. The American people are beginning to vote across racial lines, and I hope it will happen more and more. More and more women are being elected. Look at all these women Senate candidates we have here. And you know, according to my mother, my wife, and my daughter, this world would be a lot better place if women were running it most of the time. And I do think there are special experiences and judgments and backgrounds and understandings that women bring to this process, by the way. This lady said here, how have you been affected by the economy? I mean, women know what it's like to be paid an unequal amount for equal work. They know what it's like not to have flexible working hours. They know what it's like not to have family leave or child care. So I think it would be a good thing for America if it happened, and I think it will happen in my lifetime.
Okay, I'm sorry, we have just a little bit time left. Let's try to get responses from each of them. President Bush or
I think
Mr.
if Barbara
Burrow?
Bush were running this year, she'd be elected. But it's too late. You don't want us to mention appointees, but when you see the quality of people in our administration, see how Colin Powell performed, I say administration, he's in. You weren't impressed with the fact that he...
Excuse me, I'm extremely impressed
but wouldn't
with
that suggest to the American people then, here's a quality person, if he decided that he could automatically get the nomination of either party?
Your
or,
guess?
huh?
I'm totally impressed with that. I just want to know is when's your guess
I
when?
see. You mean time?
Yeah.
I don't know. Starting after 4 years. No, I think you'll see more. I think you'll see more minority candidates and women candidates coming forward. This is supposed to be the women's year of the women in the Senate. Let's see how they do. I hope
Mr. Perot, I don't want to cut you off anymore, but we only have a minute left.
I have a fearless forecast. Unless he just won't do it, Colin Powell will be on somebody's ticket 4 years from now. Right? Yeah. Right? Hey, you wanted, that's it, 4 years.
How about a woman?
Now, if he won't be, General Waller would be a concern. Now, you say, why do you keep picking military people? These are people that I just happen to know and have a high regard for. I'm sure there are hundreds of others.
How about Dr. Lou Sullivan?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good man.
Absolutely.
What about a woman?
Well, I told you, my candidate's back there.
Okay, I can think of many.
Many?
Absolutely.
When?
All right, how about Sandra Day O'Connor as an example? Dr. Bernadine Healy.
Good.
National Institute of Health. All right, I'll yield the floor. Name some more.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to apologize to our audience because there were 209 people here and there were 209 questions. We only got to a fraction of them, and I'm sorry to those of you that didn't get to ask your questions, but we must move to the conclusion of the program. It is time now for the 2-minute closing statements, and by prior agreement, President Bush will go first.
May I ask for an exception, because I think we owe Carol Simpson. Anybody can stand in between these three characters here and get the job done. We owe her a round of applause. So, but don't take it out of my time.
That's right.
I feel strongly about it, but I don't want it to come out of my time. No, but let me just say to the American people, in 2.5 weeks, we're going to choose who should sit in this Oval Office, who to lead the economic recovery, who to be the leader of the free world, who to get the deficit down. 3 ways to do that. One is to raise taxes. One is to reduce spending, controlling that mandatory spending. Another one is to invest and save and to stimulate growth. I do not want to raise taxes. I differ with the two here on that. I'm just not going to do that. I do believe that we need to control mandatory spending. I think we need to invest and save more. I believe that we need to educate better and retrain better. I believe that we need to export more, so I'll keep working for export agreements where we can sell more abroad. And I believe that we must strengthen